Doesn't look the same as your email.
I think it looks the same as email.
See,
Good evening. Are we on? Yeah. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex.
here.
Ms. Shenoweth. Present. Mr. Hayes. Present. Ms. Pack.
Present.
Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Whalen. Ms. Wyman.
Here.
Mayor Satterthwaite.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. And the first item is additions to the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay, next we'll move to staff report. Mayor Satterthwaite, have you got anything for us tonight?
Not specifically, Mr. Waldman, anything you should know about? I did pass around, there is a resolution by the Chamber of Commerce supporting our efforts at the Economic Development Area Tax Increment Allocation Act. We'll support that, send that around. It's a letter of support. And we're still proceeding with that, and we'll see where that goes.
Anything else?
We have a spring yard waste pickup that's coming along, I think this week and next week, 2 times this month, so.
1 through 8 is the first pickup.
Yeah, next week's the first pickup, and I've seen the signs up at intersections. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move right along to approval of the minutes of the March 14th, 2005 meeting. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
I second.
Motion by Ms. Wyman, second by Mr. Hayes. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Next, we'll go to public input. And again, I'll remind anyone who came in, if you wish to speak, please fill out one of these orange forms on the back table and bring it up to the clerk. Each member of the public has an opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes. We do have quite a few folks, so if you speak in less than 5 minutes, that certainly is appreciated. And I'll remind members of the committee, since we do have a lot of folks here, we will have an opportunity for our own discussion and debate, so if folks could please limit your questions to those things you really need to know from members of the public when they speak, that would be appreciated. And we will start with Mary Dennis, representing the Urbana Business Association, on this topic of amending the liquor code. And is Mary still here? Oh, I guess not. Okay, well, she's in support. Next, we'll hear from May Berenbaum, 1505 Raintree Woods Drive, on the topic of the comprehensive plan. And after that, we'll hear from Bjork Holte. I'm sorry, please sit down. I should have told you. Please have a seat at the table, and you don't need to sign in, and you can just speak. Thank you.
I have no idea if this will be 5 minutes or less. I should, I guess, identify myself. Not only am I a resident of Northeast Urbana, I'm head of the entomology department at the University of Illinois. I'm an insect ecologist by training, I have a PhD from Cornell University in ecology and evolutionary biology. I have been head of the entomology department since 1992. I don't know much about things like zoning laws, but I do know a lot about insects, which is the reason I'm here. Insects and natural areas and the like. Oh, another one of my professional responsibilities at the university is I'm the chair of the Natural Areas Committee. Natural Areas Committee is in the portfolio of the Vice Chancellor for Research. The university owns almost 1,000 acres of natural areas within a 50-mile radius of the university, and these are essentially living laboratories for university researchers who are involved in integrative biology. And some of the natural areas that are owned by the university, they're of tremendous value because they have been historically carefully documented. There's an enormous database that's accumulated in some cases for decades. These areas are at risk, but I speak not on behalf of the university, but rather as a homeowner in this area. The reason I chose to live in this area is that too, is essentially a living laboratory. I live in Raintree Woods, and Raintree Woods is a tiny little sliver of a remnant of what was known as the Big Grove, this forest association that is this area is typically tallgrass prairie, and tallgrass prairie is an ecosystem that's maintained by fire. Bodies of water stop the fires, so there are the only place in this type of habitat where trees can grow is where the prairie fires stop at water courses, and there is a water course. Champaign County is crisscrossed by the Saline Ditch. Doesn't have a very romantic name, but it is essentially an artery for these natural areas. As an entomologist, I know Raintree Woods has host plants for a number of very charismatic species of butterflies, including the giant swallowtail, Papilio crespontes. It's the only place I know where Tilia trifoliata, the hop tree, grows. It's also a stopping place for migrating monarch butterflies. Monarchs, you may know, have this heroic 1,000-mile migration that runs through Illinois, and they need special environments in which to stop over in their long flights. And these are determined by, well, factors we don't really understand, but they are wooded areas. The Illini Grove on campus is another one. Why I'm going on at length about this is because one of the 3 plans that was voted, I guess, this month, to leave in for discussion is to leave High Cross Road as a possible interchange site for future development. The problem is High Cross Road, that the Trumpet extension backs up onto Raintree Woods, and bringing traffic and development in close proximity to one of the only areas remaining that is, in some cases, well, it's essentially pristine. And I have aerial photos go back 6 decades, and you can see these wooded areas have persisted over all kinds of land use and all kinds of development. So there's a continuity there. There are populations of wildlife that rely on these. Running the Trumpet interchange back through so that it backs up onto Raintree Woods would result in changes in water flow, soil compaction, incidents of vandalism if development comes too close, and puts at risk many of these species that, for all intents and purposes, can't be found elsewhere. Our living laboratories, our research areas, are recruitment tools for the university. They produce, they attract scholars here. They attract grants, and while the university maintains them, you can't really, just like you can't maintain an NMR facility without a surrounding community to provide its needs. You can't provide a natural area, a quality natural area, without other natural areas that are contiguous with that. Connectance is an ecological concept that's of tremendous importance. Isolated areas in and of themselves can't provide the resources that these organisms require. A species that requires, how am I doing on time?
Actually, if you'd wrap up, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. The point is, you can't build back diversity. Once you lose it, you can't build it back. We have so precious little of it here. It seems there at least one other alternative would plan. The 1800 East has minimal impact on what's left of our what gives us some natural beauty and ecosystem services. And I'm sorry to have degenerated here. It's not from the head, it's from the heart, and that's one reason it's not as articulate as I might have been. Sorry, do I go?
Very articulate. And let me see, does anyone have any questions for Dr. Birnbaum? Mr. Ellis?
Yeah, the chair would entertain one question. I have heard comments similar to what you've expressed about Brownfield Woods, which is, of course, to some extent a conservation reserve in that it's restricted access and so forth owned by the university. Raintree Woods, on the other hand, as I understand it, is a residential subdivision. Is there any type of conservation easement or any effort underway to protect these natural amenities that you're talking about, given that they're part of in a sense, a residential subdivision as opposed to a park or a conservation area. I mean, you're asking us to protect these natural areas, but to some extent they've already been developed.
Right. We do have I guess it's a homeowners agreement covenant. Sharon White might be able to address these more, but there are rules and restrictions that are agreed upon by the residents, and I've been living there since 1988, and if anything, the residents there have been very active in removing invasive species and in restoring vegetation. I mean, there's an active program, well, individual, not coordinated. Also, we just bought, I'm sorry, I have like no saliva left here. We just bought the 5 acres that's contiguous with our waterfront on the Saline that was until recently owned by Jim Toll, and we're in the process of restoring it. In fact, this 5 acres is now being used by Tony Indris's restoration ecology class. There are 2 teams of students that are surveying the area, looking into historic land use and developing plans to restore this. And our intent is to make it basically a butterfly and bird preserve. And that was the purpose for which it was purchased.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Berenbaum? Thank you very much. Next we'll hear from
listening.
Georg Holte. Thank you. And after that, it'll be Bill Bagby.
Members of the Urbana City Council, good evening. My name is Bjorg Holte, and I have lived at 1001 North Highcross Road since 1987, and prior to that, in rural northeast Urbana for an additional 10 years. For 4 years, perhaps the most visible and regular observers of the monthly meetings of the Urbana Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee have been those of us from Northeast Urbana. In addition, we Northeast Urbana residents have been present at meetings of the CUATS Technical Committee and the CUATS Policy Committee discussing the Long Range Transportation Plan, LRTP, and the Illinois 130 High Cross Road Corridor Study. This evening, the preceding comments underline our sincere concern about a truly unique, extremely valuable natural and historic area, which is Northeast Urbana. Tonight, my comments relate specifically to the Urbana Plan Commission recommendations recorded in the document titled Attachment 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan, Plan Commission Action, March 17, 2005. Please take a moment to find this attachment. First, we have a few short but significant suggestions in 3 places on page 2. For brevity, I will refer to them as paragraphs 2 and 4, and the first paragraph of Appendix E, Mobility Map. We suggest the addition of 4 important words at the end of each paragraph as follows. The 4 words are environmental and ecological impact. Additionally, on page 2, please turn your attention to the 3rd paragraph, the title of which is page 105, Implementation Strategy, 2nd strategy listed. I will read it. Support the goals and objectives of the long-range transportation plan developed by CUATS when evaluating transportation projects. On the contrary, at the March 17, 2005 Urbana Plan Commission meeting, it was clearly stated that the principles of the new comprehensive plan would guide all future development of the goals and objectives of the Long-Range Transportation Plan, LRTP, developed by CUATS. What I just read from the attachment, page 2, states the opposite. This item must be rewritten to reflect the dominance of the comprehensive plan. Finally, with reference to future land use map number 2, we feel that Interstate 74 desperately needs additional clear signage. New signs on I-74, eastbound and westbound, as they pertain to University Avenue exit 185, would appropriately and adequately direct traffic to U.S. Route 150 and Illinois Route 130 and businesses such as Walmart, and thus eliminate need for any road construction. In northeast Urbana, we have the site of the first settlement in Champaign County, the oldest school in Champaign County, early settlers' cemeteries, and plant and animal life found nowhere else in the area. The vision and cornerstone goals, as stated in the new comprehensive plan, are quality of life, sensible growth, services and infrastructure, and mobility. These are completely compatible without new road building in northeast Urbana. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Ms. Holton? Mr. Alex?
Just one. This council was asked to endorse the CUATS Transportation Study 2025 a couple of meetings ago, and we granted that endorsement with the proviso to the extent that it is compatible with the Urbana Comprehensive Plan. Do you think that your problem with on page 105 would be addressed by adding to the statement that you gave, support the goals and objectives of the long-range transportation plan developed by CUATS when evaluating transportation projects? If we were to add to the extent that they are compatible with the other provisions of this comprehensive plan, would that address your concerns about which plan leads what? Because I think our intention is not to discount the numerous positive aspects of the CUATS plan, but to say that we support it only to the extent that our comprehensive plan is in agreement with it.
I feel that the comprehensive plan should be leading CUATS and LRTP projects. I don't know how that can be rewritten, but that is my feeling. Other people may want to speak to that issue as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Bill Bagby, 2314 North High Cross Road, and after that, Lois Steinberg.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name's Bill Bagby, and I'm here to address the intense concern of about 300 of my neighbors. We want to be sure that the language in the comprehensive plan reflects the course of growth, the best course of growth for Urbana's future residents. You notice that I didn't say for the future northeast Urbana residents or rural residents where I live. You're already aware of the opinions of over 95% of that area's residents from the Rural Preservation Group's petition that was given to each of you. I said Urbana's future residents because a lot of our families and children and future generations will continue living here. We all breathe this air, we share this water and weather, and we can enjoy the beauty of these pristine perimeter areas now and in the future, depending on the choices that you make here tonight. The quality of life that we leave for our kids, which is directly dependent upon the quality of the environment that we leave for them, will play a major role in determining their health and even their financial condition and their happiness. I understand that I'm probably preaching to the choir here because I know most of you to be very intelligent, capable individuals, and even though you might be missing some details of the subtle interrelatedness of all the amazing forms of life in our perimeter areas, my experience is that most of you are at least have an appreciation for the natural beauty of these areas. If you don't, then I'm going to recommend that someone steal your computer for a week and you go camping. As you know, the comprehensive plan document before you tonight is a guiding document for the development of our community for many years to come. If we look at the last couple decades, some of the development decisions that were made, especially concerning traffic control, roads, drainage, planned vegetation, and new housing under the last comprehensive plan, have not worked very well. Specifically, I'm referring to the goals of retaining or increasing business and protecting our environment. I don't think anyone needs for me to list the businesses that have left or closed, or how different things could be if we had that extra tax base to work with. I do think that it needs to be mentioned, though, what's happening to the natural areas that are a key to the very survival of a multitude of plant and animal species. They're being divided up. They're there for us to cooperate with and appreciate, but they're still disappearing. In the 1830s, the forested area in our county was 6%. In 1993, it had dropped to 1.4%. That's a long period of time. That's 160 years. Much more drastic and disturbing is, according to the recent Blue Ribbon Panel report to the county board, this forested area in Champaign County is now less than 0.5%. I propose to you that both problems can be solved, or both of these trends can begin to reverse by the simple, same approach. No new roads slicing up our rural perimeters. We do not need road extensions or an expansion or completion, whatever you want to call it, of any road onto High Cross Road. Whether it be an I-74 University exit over to High Cross or the continuation of Olympian Drive over to High Cross. In short, we ask that you please remove all references to new roads on the northeast of town. On your page 75, the future land use map number 2, as well as the Appendix E mobility map. I hope that you could imagine a little about the best that could happen if we refrain from disturbing these areas. You can also ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen, if you need to think out of the box, if we take these road references out of the plan and refrain from disturbing this area? Perhaps more traffic going past businesses on Route 45 or through downtown? And increasing numbers of southeast Urbana residents traveling past Philo Road businesses or Cunningham Avenue businesses to leave or come home? Slowly increasing encouragement for residents to use public transportation options? I don't think those are necessarily a bad thing. Anyway, thanks for your concern, and I hope that this important document will truly be consistent with its other carefully thought out goals and objectives, and especially the vision and cornerstone goals of quality of life and mobility and sensible growth. I understand that there's a lot of factors out there that are not in your control, but the decisions that you make here tonight concerning these roads and the maps are in your control and will make a huge difference in how our community continues to develop. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any questions for... Any questions, Mr. Bagby? No. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Lois Steinberg, 306 West Nevada, and after that from Carl Burrell.
I don't really have anything to add to that. It was all said, and I agree with them, and I hope that you listen to them, and that if you can't come to an agreement to strike out High Cross Road from the plan, that you table the comprehensive plan until it can be worked out to everybody's satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Carl Burrell, if I'm pronouncing that right, 2005 Boudreaux. And after that, from Danny Otto.
My handwriting's not so good. My name is Carl Deal.
Oh, Deal. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
And I just wanted to read a statement concerning the Orchard Downs development. I understand it's part of the comprehensive plan, and I won't need 5 minutes. Several meetings ago, when the Planning Commission met and discussed this plan, university representatives were present. And in response to my question, will the university continue its graduate housing in Orchard Downs, the university representative gave an unqualified reply, yes. Returning from a trip during which I missed the last meeting last week, about the plan, I learned that the student housing will be leveled and that the use of that property will be leased to a developer for 99 years. That doesn't lead me to have much faith thus far in the university's public revelations and what will go on behind the scenes between now and the time that development takes place. This is a land-grant institution that has had a goal of bettering rural life. Can we expect it now to follow lasting aesthetic values to which city and urban planning should be committed, as opposed to development overly biased towards increasing tax revenue? How much trust can we place in the university and developers to balance the two with aesthetic and environmental concerns receiving a high priority? That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Deal? Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Danny Otto, 405 West Illinois, and after that from Gabriel Omosagi.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm a relative newcomer to this city, and I think the practice of having public comment is a great practice. And it's also great that we can watch this from our own home. And so I have learned to plan my Monday evenings around watching public comment at the City Council meeting. And I'm learning a lot. I have several quick points I'd like to make, and they might seem to be unrelated, but I think they are. First, regarding the comprehensive plan, I live at 405 West Illinois, which is several blocks away from Busey, but I still care a great deal about what will happen at Busey. And I'm concerned that the designation of Busey as for future study is a softening of the current plan designation for that. And I hear talk that neighborhoods reach a tipping point where it's useless to try to save them for single family because too much development or blight has occurred, so just give it over to the developers. But since your meeting about a month ago, when a lot of people came to talk about the landlord registry on Busey, a single-family home that landlords were eager to have actually sold to another single-family residence. So that is still a desirable street for people to live on. And I urge you to only strengthen the requirements in that community to protect it from developers, and don't do anything that would soften that. The second thing I'd like to talk about is I listened a lot during the discussion of the variance for the Presbyterian Church. And it was a little disheartening because, but it got my curiosity up. So I came down and looked at the variance request, and I looked at the code covering variances. And I felt that in many ways the council needs to be chided for, and also the appeals board, for overlooking the language of the code and the intent of the code on variances. As I read the code, the intent of a variance is to allow a slight deviation to accommodate one of the conditions is a hardship. So I would take that as if someone has already covered their property with the appropriate density and they want to do something to serve a public need, perhaps handicapped accessibility, we would allow a bit more density in order for them to do that. But the nearly doubling of the density on that lot, that's not a variance. That's changing the zoning on the lot. And so much of the discussion hinged upon the character of the institution asking for the variance. And I don't see in the zone, in the code, that character is one of the determinations. You look at the effect on the neighborhood, you looked at increased traffic, those sorts of things. And the church is doing fine work, but they're wanting to do more than is envisioned on that property. And so when you do that at the same time that you're working up a new comprehensive plan, I say, well, what does this comprehensive plan mean if individuals can simply come and based upon, or institutions, based on their merit as an institution, you throw out the comprehensive plan and say, this looks like a good thing, we're going to do it, in spite of the very articulate and vigorous resistance from the residents of the neighborhood. So I looked at that, and I really think you made a mistake there. And I know that your term as council is about over, except for Danielle. But future councils should perhaps be encouraged to read the city code because on things that frequently come to council, to make sure that they understand that it doesn't matter really whether we like the activities of an organization or not. There are other issues and assurances that have been made to people who have substantial stakes in that neighborhood, and that can't be so easily overridden. Do I have 1 more minute left?
Yes.
Okay. The last thing is on code enforcement and a suggestion on the people who enforce parking. I live on Illinois and there's restricted parking, and I'm amazed at how quickly the parking people materialize when I'm having something like a delivery last week. A business brought a delivery. It was an unmarked car. It wasn't UPS. They were dropping off a package, and before they got back, they literally didn't talk to me. They called me on the phone. They went to the porch, dropped it off, went back, and they were being written up. And they had to really wheedle quite plaintively to avoid having a ticket for that. And they're doing a good job. Obviously, they're everywhere. Could they perhaps, as they're driving up and down the residential streets, pay attention to all the sofas on the front porches that don't belong there, I think, according to city code, and write those up and pass them on to the city attorney? Well, you're leaving us. 4 days. The next city attorney, to get these porches cleaned up so that when we walk around our neighborhood, we don't feel like we're in some decrepit neighborhood where people really don't care about what's going on. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Mr. Otto? Mr. Alex?
Not as much a question as a comment. I would say if you'd want to contact the mayor's office, they'd be happy to refer you to who you can call to register complaints about sofas and so forth. I make this comment because I personally became familiar with this process. I'd left some furniture at the end of my driveway to be picked up, and there was a delay in picking it up. And sure enough, I got a citation from the city's environmental officer telling me to move that furniture. So I do know that the city does enforce that, but I have been told that they enforce it on a more of a demand basis. So I would encourage you, if you do have complaints, feel free to bring that to the attention of the. I believe that it'd be the Public Works Department that's in charge of environmental nuisances. But I would definitely say if you have problems, because it does, even speaking as apparently a recent offender, I do say that it does degrade the quality of the neighborhood, and I'd certainly encourage you to make sure that people are aware of that.
That's sound advice, but I think most of us, we see those, we're out walking or something, and perhaps the parking people is there because they do patrol our streets. They could just pay attention, because it's quite visible when you have overstuffed easy chairs.
Good suggestion. It is a different group that does it, but there may be no reason why they can't forward those complaints.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Gabriel Omoasagi, 2409 North High Cross Road. And after that, Tim Gibbs.
Good evening. And I have to say, starting first, that I was told, by somebody who cared about what I said, that my words, maybe I sound abusive or combative, whatever, I'm not running for anything. From where I come from, we call it straight talking. We just say it. We don't care what anybody thinks. Just like a lot of professors that are sitting out there. Like I told a professor a few weeks ago, who I talked to him, and he wanted me to evict all the tenants in one of my apartment buildings because somebody shut off fireworks. And my question to him was, well, why don't you just call the police? He said, no, you deal with it. You're the landlord. I said, well, if I evict them, who's going to pay the rent? He said, well, you're only concerned with money. I said, do you work for free? Of course not, Well, of course, I'm still concerned about that neighborhood, The previous talker talked about people who have some substantial interest in that neighborhood. I do have very substantial interest in that neighborhood. I think I'm just as interested in seeing that neighborhood prosper as anybody sitting out there. I actually called Wuna and tried to join. They said I was not welcome. They said they didn't want me. Well, the thing is, I just want to know, when I come in here to talk, the reason why I come here is because I want to understand how different people think. And I want to understand what makes people think that they can obstruct that invisible hand that Adam Smith talks about. There's absolutely nothing. Look, interestingly, sometimes you have what you call the laws of unintended consequences. Alpha Chi Omega, which is right next to a couple of buildings I own, they bought an old house and they tore it down. They decided that they were going to build a parking lot, and interestingly, Wuna shows up and says, no, they're concerned about aesthetics. Whose aesthetics? And then these people have this parking lot, that they want to, and they actually showed me, they said the president of the Alumni Association was not being cooperative with them. And so they showed me a document that had been drawn up by some professors. You had a lot of PhDs that signed at the bottom, and they spent, 13 pages talking about a parking lot with 11 cars, for 11 cars. Then I wondered, I said, what kind of kinds of people do this? What is the arrogance of people who think they're smarter than everybody else? These are just questions that I ask myself. And of course, it's a benefit to me. If they can't build a parking lot, guess who they're going to send it to? And so I'm glad. Well, after thinking, then I said, well, you see, what happened is because of my discussions with some of the professors and so on, and my experiences when I was in college, I dropped out, so I don't have a PhD. The interesting thing is, in a free market society, what happens is that intellectuals tend to be marginalized because this society, if you're good at what you do, it rewards you with fame and money. So most of this arrogance and grand pretensions are a result of their obscurity and poverty. We have Jeff Brown, who teaches at the university. We have Professor Gathal, who is here. We have other well-known professors. I don't think they're going to be spending their time writing 13 pages for an 11-car parking lot. And these are some of the things. Look, you can't obstruct the market economy. There's nothing you're going to do about it. It's going to work. And fortunately, I have the means and the desire to play Monopoly out there in that neighborhood. So just like the first lady that talked, the woman who went to Cornell, when she talked about her neighborhood, trying to preserve her neighborhood, she said there was a vacant lot which they tried to preserve. So what they did is they bought the land to preserve it. So you put your money where your mouth is. These professors talk and talk and talk. Buy the houses that you don't want anybody living in, or buy the lot, instead of trying to confiscate people's hard-earned money. Buy the lots. Put your money together and buy them. They will know that you're doing the right thing.
Mr. Mosagi,
Yes.
if you could wrap up, please.
Okay, no problem. Does anybody want to put his foot in his mouth tonight? Mr. Alex, you want to give it a shot again?
Excuse me, Mr. Mosagi, thank you. Are there any questions?
I just had one comment.
Sure.
First of all,
Excuse me, before we do this,
Yes.
that's not what this time period is
No, I
for.
understand, I understand.
And if you have a genuine
Yes,
question, please ask
I
it.
have a
Otherwise,
genuine
go ahead,
question.
Mr. Alex.
I have a genuine question.
Okay.
Actually, I lied. It's actually a comment, but I'll keep
I
it
know
brief.
it is. Quickly.
I just want to make sure that you didn't misunderstand me. I was certainly not objecting to your in trying to increase diversity of housing. I just want to make sure that we do things in a way that are compliant with the law. I'm actually very disappointed to hear that you were told that you were not welcome by UNA, because I think one of the things that is missed, I mean, in light of some of the comments we've heard here, I understand probably why they might say that. But I think one thing that is lost a lot is that that is a mixed-use neighborhood, and it has always been a mixed-use neighborhood, that there's been a mix of multifamily housing, there's been student group houses, there have been fraternities and sororities, there have been single-family houses, there have been institutional uses, and there are certainly those who would prefer it be entirely a single-family neighborhood, others who may prefer it would be entirely rental, whatever. But I think one of the key issues in that neighborhood is that it is a mixed-use neighborhood, and I think it always has. There's apartment buildings there that were built in the 20s, and I think that to the extent that we want to keep that a strong neighborhood, it's important that we listen to everybody with an interest in that neighborhood. So I'm disappointed to hear that you were.
Okay,
you were
gentlemen,
strong.
I'm going to cut off this
Thank you.
conversation because it's inappropriate, and I would appreciate if council members, especially those who don't like to stay here all night, it's stuff like this that makes the meetings go longer. So thank you, Mr. Homosagi.
Thank you.
And next we will hear from
Thank you
Tim
very
Gibbs, 904 South Race Street, and after that, John Eisen.
This is perfect to follow. Thank you all so much. I almost feel sorry, or I don't know what you must do to listen to all this. It's it's as if you're doing everything wrong. But anyways, I appreciate it so much. My comment concerns a comprehensive plan again. This one is for a campus expansion. Apparently it's just in beginning stages. I think it's map 11, page 84, shows 18 houses, Washington, Race, Iowa Street, right north of the high school, is being demolished for parking lots. And I just bought one of those houses, and I don't want it to be a parking lot. I support the school, and I'm not sure how else to participate in this decision-making. One of the alder women informed me about the meeting, so I came to speak. Not prepared. Maybe excuse me, Ms. Pat. Is this a question-answer? Not really.
Not really. If there's something that you want to know that's important for you to be able to make your statement, you can ask a question, and if anyone has a question for you about what you're discussing, they can ask it. Is there anything you have a question about?
Yeah. Where should a citizen find out about for something like their house being demolished for a parking lot? I mean, I guess the question is, could this plan have gone through and this happened without me knowing? No.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think most of the people here came to plan commissions, they've already heard this. The comprehensive plan is not, it won't change the zoning of any land, it will not create any development. Think in terms of urban planning, it's a general plan for a vision for the next 20 years. And different things that might happen in response to this plan, like a zoning change, would come before the city council at some later date, at some point in the next 20 years. And something like demolishing your house, the school district if the school district were going to do it, for example, the school district would need to buy your house in order to
I might know that.
to demolish it. Yeah, right. And they would let you know that. And then there are other complicated things like governments having eminent domain power and possibly being able to force you to sell, et cetera. And I don't believe that's happening tomorrow. But if you have concerns about the vision for that area, since you did just buy a house there, this is the appropriate place to address those concerns, because that is one of the things we're looking at in the comprehensive plan. Does that?
Yes, super.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I could make one more comment on that. My understanding is that if there were a change in actually what those lots are used for, the vehicle by which that would happen would be the school board would decide to purchase that property and use it. So I would say probably, we are faced with a problem tonight and in subsequent meetings of deciding what the comprehensive plan ought to say about that area, but to some extent we're playing a guessing game saying what's the school board going to do with that land and what do we think is appropriate. But the only organization that ultimately has the power to decide whether or not to buy that land and use it for something is somebody would walk in and buy it, and that would probably be the school board. So I would certainly say you ought to be in contact with the school board representative for your local sub-district and make sure they're aware of your feelings as well.
Thank you. That's a very good point. And for that matter, the entire school board.
Super. Thank you so much.
Are there any questions? Thank you. Next, we'll hear from John Eisen of 103 West Holmes, followed by Charlie Smythe.
Good evening. As you heard, I'm John Eisen, 103 West Holmes. We've lived there for 23 years now. We're just one house off of Ray Street, which puts us right across from Orchard Downs, so you know why I'm here. Many concerned residents, there were about 30 who showed up at the meeting on March 10th of the Plan Commission, and many of us expressed our concern then over the future of the Orchard Downs area. When I attended the meeting March 17th of the Plan Commission, I was pleased to hear that the staff had heard some of our concerns at the first meeting and proposed revised language in the draft plan regarding the Orchard Downs area. In between those two meetings, I met with John Dempsey, the Director of Facilities and Services at the university, on March 16th and received his assurances of the university's intent to protect the character of Orchard Downs and the adjoining neighborhood. Still, we often see instances of the interests of the community conflicting with those of the university. And where university-owned property is concerned, the university's interests usually seem to win out. We're watching one of those scenarios play out now as the university plans to remove the Georgian Apartments in Champaign to provide more parking. Mr. Dempsey indicated that once the university leases the land, the city will have authority over its zoning and development. I have yet to validate that. He also mentioned it might be best to relocate the family and graduate housing portion of Orchard Downs to a new location closer to the South Research Park. That relocation would seem to remove the justification for the neighborhood businesses mentioned in the revised draft, so I'm led to wonder just what sort of development the city might be asked to approve. If Mr. Dempsey is correct that the city would have authority over the development of the area, then the residents in that area need assurance that the city will be looking out for their interests. When I read the consultant's report, I noted that one option for the land is to relocate the family and graduate students' housing elsewhere, as Mr. Dempsey also mentioned, and turn the entire area over to developers for a mix of commercial, retail, professional, and mixed residential development. Not only will the council have to consider the impact on surrounding neighborhoods and their property values, but also the impact on existing commercial areas such as downtown Urbana and the already struggling Philo Road corridor. My request tonight is that the council assume a leadership role in the Orchard Downs development and to say clearly in the comprehensive plan what is acceptable use for the area and what is not acceptable. The staff's recommendations that the future development should consider the relationship and compatibility of new developments to the surrounding area, the scale and extent of potential supporting neighborhood businesses, provisions for community, open space, and links to open space and amenities, and consideration of existing natural features. Those are a start, but only a start, and the neighborhood is entitled to clear indications of what we might expect from the City Council. Any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Charlie Smythe, 805 South Kohler, followed by Lisa Truel.
Okay, I think I can be very brief, addressing the issue of the Busey corridor, the Busey finger, however you want to look at it. This area was studied extensively in 1990, leading to the mixed office residential development or zoning and substantial rezoning along Busey Avenue. It was recognized then that this had been a stable neighborhood single-family neighborhood for about 40 years. So now we're at 55 years now of a stable single-family neighborhood. The downzonings and the designation of the mixed office residential took some pressure off of the West Urbana neighborhood. The neighborhood stabilized. Now, we've been seeing some additional decay in recent years, and those are issues that need to be addressed. But from the point of view of somebody who was on the council in 1990, looking at those issues, the decay we were seeing along Busey Avenue came to a stop. And we've had families move back into certain parts of the area. We've had families move back into Illinois Street and so on. In plain English, this neighborhood doesn't need further study. It needs to be left alone. It needs to be left as it was in 1990, 1991 in those rezonings. If anything, we need to go back and look at potentially removing some of the grandfathered buildings and houses that are in there that continue to add to the stress of the neighborhood, that are further, they're the properties that are decaying and dragging down the borders of this neighborhood. So I urge you, the council, to simply remove this language that says that this is an area to be for further study. It just simply doesn't need any. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Smythe?
I've just got a quick one. This will actually be the question that I could ask Gabe, I guess. One of the comment I made to him was related to this being actually a mixed neighborhood. That since you talked about grandfathered use, I wanted to ask you for a follow-up on that. The whole reason that these uses are grandfathered is because this neighborhood was more than just a single-family neighborhood, especially in that block between Lincoln and Busey. Is it your feeling that should change? That you're essentially saying that the guidance should be to convert that into a single-family neighborhood, or is it to preserve mixed use?
I'll answer you. The zoning map is very clear that most of this is R2, an R2 neighborhood. And what you have along Busey Avenue is a buffer. And I've described that buffer before. It's the backyards of the houses that are on Busey Avenue that buffer Lincoln Avenue and the properties there. And as much as possible, you want to have the buffer in the backyard, not in the front yard. A street is not a good buffer. When you've got a single-family house across a high density, that's not a good buffer. So where you possibly can, you want to put the buffer in the backyard, because that really does help stabilize things.
Okay,
and that's what has happened, and that's what I'm urging you to do. And what I'm seeing is that the properties that are a problem in this neighborhood are those that have been left at R7, or who are grandfathered in as boarding houses or duplexes or R4 level uses, but really are crammed into duplexes or less. And those are the properties that we're seeing decaying.
Okay.
And those are the ones that we need to address in this neighborhood.
Okay, and your comments, just so I understand, although we're talking about the Busey corridor, which is not only between Busey and Lincoln, your specific concerns are for Busey, not for Lincoln.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and what I'm saying is that the border belongs in the backyards, not in the front yards.
Okay, thank you.
Wherever possible, we need to identify a buffer that is not a street, but yards.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Smythe. Next, we'll hear from Lisa Truhl, 714 West Iowa, followed by Georgia Morgan.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Truhl, and I'm also the co-coordinator of the West Urbana Neighborhood Association. And as Mayor McCollum from the city of Champaign once told me, no good deed goes unpunished. And I'm here to tell you that I personally, and Gabe knows this as a fact, had dropped off membership forms to WUNA when Gabe lived on Busey Avenue, because we certainly wanted him as a contributing member and thought he was an important person to have in our organization. Now that he's left the area, our procedure guidelines prevent non-residents from being members of the West Urbana Neighborhood Association. He was told this, and he informed me out in the hall that he keeps a residence, an apartment, in the West Urbana Neighborhood Association, so now he will be very much welcome to join WUNA. So that aside, now I'm speaking as a public, my public persona is set aside, and now I'm speaking as Lisa Truhl of West Iowa Street, and I do say that we need to keep what works, and that is the downtown to campus plan. You're right, it is a mixed-use neighborhood. That's what gives the neighborhood the vitality, but you have to have a balance, and I think the downtown to campus plan has struck that balance. I think that when we talked about studying, it was to have a pragmatic approach to some of the landlords, such as Kevin Hunsinger, who owns property along Busey Avenue, who was on the steering committee. who said, hey, I have these boarding houses that students aren't very interested in renting, and I'd like to do something with. And we said, well, we'll take a pragmatic approach, that perhaps study of the R7 properties, those being the boarding houses and that, converting those into condos, maybe in the future fraternity houses or sorority houses, turning those into condos. Or 3 apartments, that was something. That's how the study came about. We were very clear that we only wanted those properties studied. We were very happy and continue to be happy with the effects of the Downtown to Campus plan. It's a good plan. We need to keep what's good and improve on what we need to improve on. And I think that's it. That's all I have to say. So,
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Truill?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm sorry, Mayor Satterthwaite?
So is that, when that particular finger is labeled at the comprehensive plan as under further study, do you recommend that we keep that designation under further study with the understanding that you had?
Well, see, that's the problem, is that
change it back to what it is now?
I think it has to be. I'm a very pragmatic person, and I said again to city staff that it's fine to study the R7 properties, but I don't want the whole finger studied, because it's working. It has to be that specific. And we were very specific that we wanted it that specific. I think it's a pragmatic approach. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think Kevin Hunsinger brings up some valid points, and we need to listen to that. They're thoughtful ideas, and they're thoughtful plan of action that we have to explore, but we don't have to open it up to this whole encompassing. I think you can study some adaptive reuses. That's really what we were after, was adaptive reuses of the R7 properties. And we didn't want the R7 properties to be torn down. And I can say that I had most of the single-family homeowners of Busey Avenue in my living room last summer when this comprehensive plan came up, when there were other ideas floated for the Busey corridor. And all the single-family homeowners that were in attendance favored an adaptive reuse of the R7 properties. So keeping the shell, so you keep the character and the aesthetics of the neighborhood, but doing, splitting a big house into 3 smaller apartments. But those only for the R7 properties. That was something that you seem puzzled.
No, I'm just listening. I'm trying to determine, I think, what the same question the mayor asked, which is, are you asking us we've been asked to amend the comprehensive plan to just take that out and leave it alone, or are you asking us to qualify this somehow, and do you feel that there is a specific study that needs to be done that is important enough that it should be incorporated into the comprehensive plan,
regarding
as
the
opposed to just being
adaptive
allowed to happen
reuse
by
of the
itself?
R7, but I don't think that the whole, as it is written now, the study of the corridor, it leaves it too wide open to then bringing in the downtown to campus plan. Seems too much in question then.
So I think we're all on the same page.
I think we are. The devil's in the details.
Right.
But
and so what you're saying is to leave the downtown to campus plan intact, but maybe a notation somewhere saying that if there can be some creative reuses of the R7 properties, that might be acceptable depending on the design and so forth.
For me personally, that would be fine, because I'm a pragmatic person, and I hear what people like Kevin Hunsinger are saying. But I think the way it's written, it's too broad, and it can't be interpreted that way. And I feel very uncomfortable with the way it's written right now. So.
I'm sorry, just one more, so I don't.
Sure.
So I'm not confused in the future.
Do you want to join Luna?
I don't live in your neighborhood. What other criteria? Is it ownership of land, or is it residence? I wasn't aware of what the criteria was. You actually have to. So tenants are allowed to join, but
absolutely.
But owners of property who do not reside there are not.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
But we're looking at that next year for our steering, our procedural guidelines.
I think it might be appropriate to realize that anybody who owns property may have an interest in the neighborhood.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Maybe the whole city should join the neighborhood organization.
Hey, it's a great place. I bake great chocolate chip cookies.
Thank you.
Got me.
Next, we'll hear from Georgia Morgan, 804 West Nevada, followed by John Dickel.
Thank you. I want to second what Lisa said about changing the language about this Busey corridor in the comprehensive plan. I think it would be a big mistake to retain this language which says further study of the Lincoln-Busey corridor to determine optimal land uses and potential reuse or redevelopment of specific properties, because to me, that just sounds like open season on the Busey corridor, since specific properties is not further delineated. On the other hand, if you just count this as residential area, and in the whole of the residential area say that R7 properties should be considered for adaptive reuse, I think that would be a much better idea. The area doesn't in general need to be studied, it needs to be preserved.
Are there any questions for Ms. Morgan? I have one, because I think this is, there might be some confusion here. If you did not feel threatened by a proposal to change anything, and you were just asked, what do you think is best for the Busey finger, would you want to see those R7 uses torn down and replaced with low-density multifamily? Like a rooming house torn down and a 4-unit apartment building built in its place. Would you want to see that?
A perfectly good rooming house? I mean, if the building looks good on the outside, I think it preserves the character of the neighborhood to keep the building rather than to replace it with a box that looks like the other boxes going up on the corners.
Since all those rooming houses generate between $25,000 and $35,000 a year of rental income per house, and the property owners are paying about $1,000 a year more than you are in property tax, do you think they should be able to maintain them in good shape?
I think they should pay a whole lot more tax than that.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not getting $25,000 for living in my house.
Next, we'll hear from John Dickel, 1005 South Busey, followed by Ann Reisner.
I'm John Dickel, and my address at 1005 South Busey tells you why I'm here. The the downtown to campus plan was debated and studied very carefully when it was gone through. And from what I can see, nothing has changed in that 15 years. We still have some landlords who would like to make more money, and we have other people who want to keep the mix that we have now. And given the alternatives that were just discussed, if I had to make a choice between the wordings, I would say take out the study. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Dickel? Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Ann Reisner, 905 South Busey, followed by Linda Lorenz.
Ann Reisner, 905 South Busey, and I'm speaking as somebody who just relatively recently purchased a single-family home on Busey Street, and we very much want to keep the Busey corridor in our backyards and not on either side. And so I'm speaking in favor of keeping the Busey corridor where it used to be, where it was originally planned, in the backyard, and in favor of keeping the downtown to campus plan as it was talked about 15 years ago.
Are there any questions?
Please, no.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Linda Lorenz, 409 West High Street, followed by Beverly Rothfuss.
I'd also like to speak in favor of the downtown to campus plan.
Could you speak up a little?
I'd also like to speak in favor of the downtown to campus plan. In general terms, I would like to see my neighborhood maintained so that the wonderful school that we have at Leal and the fantastic library that we have are accessible to us by walking and riding our bicycles, which is why I bought in that neighborhood. I come down to these meetings, and what I see happening is that, as was pointed out, is that these variances allow people to keep chipping away at little sections of our neighborhood along the edges with more lots, more more kids, more cars, more something, and that changes the character and the great quality of our neighborhood, and that's what worries me most. I'm certainly, I feel the same way that the folks around High Cross do, and I have attended many of these QOTS meetings. I was on the original bicycle commuting place when we got our sewer grates, and I went out in the middle of the winter and measured sewer grates because we didn't have a record in the city of the sizes and where they were made and on which corners. And so I am very committed to being in a neighborhood where I can ride my bicycle safely and get to work and go to the library and go to the grocery store. So I would also say, please don't put any more roads and mess up any more rural areas and any more habitats. And I'd also be really worried about what happens in Orchard Downs. When I started to university, I commuted on the bus. There was an Illy bus, and I literally walked through that section and through meadows into my backyard, and I rode my bike through the whole time my parents were at Clark Lindsay Village, and I would hate to see that turned into some monster thing next to places where people live. That's what we worry about, is seeing our homes and our neighborhoods and our yards and our old homes all messed up. So please help us to protect that.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Lorenz? Thank you. Betsy Cronin, 305 West High Street, does not wish to speak, but wanted to her position in opposition to the Busey corridor being a study area to be recorded. And next is Beverly. I'm not pronouncing your name right.
Beverly Rockfist.
306 West Iowa.
Basically, I just want to say I agree with everything that Charlie Smythe and Lisa and everybody about the about the Busey finger, about not changing the variances for that. I'm not explaining myself very well, but I live at 306 West Iowa Street. I'm not that close to Busey, but I'm still very concerned about the neighborhood, and I think that if there are changes made in the if there's changes made, I think that I'm just very.
Do you want no change? Is that what
I want no change, and I think that the buffer needs to remain the same as it is. That's all.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Next we hear from Stephen Kaufman, 4 Burnett Circle, and after that from George Boyd.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Kaufman. I live at 4 Burnett Circle. I've lived in that area for the past 31 years. Before getting to address the redevelopment, I would like to reiterate a request that I made about 2 months ago to the council and to the mayor, and that is for the citizens of Urbana to have an accounting on the investments made by the city in the TIF program. I was told at this meeting to send a written request to the mayor. I did so by email. I do consider that a written request, and I still have not heard. I think the citizens of Urbana deserve an accounting of whether or not the TIF expenditures are actually doing what is intended to do, and that is to increase our tax revenues beyond what the cost of the TIF projects actually are. And I hope that the mayor or whoever, the council, will be forthcoming with that and actually publish that in one of the papers. If I've missed that, already published, my apologies. So, on to the redevelopment plan. I live about a block and a half from Orchard Downs. I deliberately live in that neighborhood because of the openness of Orchard Downs. And it's my understanding, as has been spoken here earlier tonight, that the university plans to turn over 160 acres of that to the Fox Development Corporation, also known as the University of Illinois. I understand that. and that the character of that entire 160 acres will be markedly changed. The current use for student housing will be obliterated, and those people or their successors may be relocated over in Champaign. Some of you may feel that that's a good thing, okay? Others of us, because of monies that the education of children who live in that neighborhood cost the city, I would hope that the city and the university could come to some sensible agreement on that, so it is fair to all parties. I think the loss of graduate student housing in that area is a major loss for the Urbana community. I think the people who live there add markedly to the breadth of culture in the city of Urbana, and participating in their forced relocation to Champaign, as it were, is really not in the interest of the city. The enrichment that they provide to the city is going to be a major loss. I'm not sure exactly where the lines of redevelopment cut through, whether we're giving up the major mountain in Urbana to this redevelopment. I know that my children are a little bit too old for that right now and live elsewhere. However, probably thousands of children of Urbana have enjoyed that location, perhaps some of your children, perhaps you. So I'm very concerned about that. Secondly, what is proposed to go in there is a gridded community consisting of single and multifamily dwellings as well as businesses. This raises a number of concerns, one of which was spoken to earlier, and I'll reiterate it now. We've heard that there is a lot of concern by some of you and by some other people in attendance here tonight who ran for election to offices here, of the revitalization of the Sunnycrest area and the revitalization of downtown Urbana. And I'd like to ask you whether or not the development of businesses in what is now the Orchard Downs area, as proposed by Mr. Fox and the university, is going to interfere with that. If you have not studied it, I don't see how you can move ahead with what you're proposing, or what is proposed in this comprehensive plan. And I would ask you to table that consideration until you do have a very clear study telling you about the impact of the development of businesses in the Orchard Downs area and how that will impact Sunnycrest, Filer Road redevelopment, as well as downtown Urbana. And lastly, perhaps it's no use in saying this here. I'm concerned about eminent domain, whereby the University of Illinois claims eminent domain and then leases for 99 years land to developers. Okay, and I would hope that you're concerned about that as well, and will be staunch representatives of the people of Urbana when it comes to that. This is not the first instance of that, and I hope that you will stand for the citizenry of Urbana and champion their interests, which I will take for granted that you do in every case. So, any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions, Mr. Kaufman? Oh, thank you very much. And last but not least...
Excuse me.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah.
Am I going to get, are the people of Urbana going to get an accounting of the TIF expenditures and...
Are you talking about an accounting beyond what's in the budget? Or would you like to see that?
Public accounting. We spend this much, we get that much in. Therefore, it works. Therefore, it doesn't work.
Mayor Satterthwaite?
Yeah, each TIF district has a plan that we, and a budget that is submitted annually. And so those are public documents, and you can get those anytime. And I don't recall getting an email from you. I would have responded if I'd seen it. I do get an unbelievable amount of spam, so it could have been that it was lost in the junk mail. But if you want to resend an email, I can get you some of those documents. But each TIF district we have has an annual report with income and the expenditures, and so that you can see where the money comes from and where it goes. And you can make your own decision as to whether it's working or not.
And would the budget document be the best place to get that?
The budget document has a little bit of that, but each TIF annual plan is a very it's a thorough document detailing every expenditure and the sources of income in each TIF district.
And are those documents that are available at the city clerk's office? If
They
Mr.
should
Kaufman were
be,
to direct
yeah.
his inquiry there?
Right, and a community development.
And community development, okay.
So let's clarify. Do I direct an inquiry to you with the heading, "This is not spam," or do I go somewhere else?
Well, if you want to get it, you can go to community development during business
The
hours.
last time I was here, I was told to go to you. That was...
Well, if you actually go into the community development office and request copies of the four of the TIF documents, they will be able to give you copies of those. Those are existing reports.
And over what span of time do you think it's reasonable to request those? For how many years back?
Oh, I don't know. I can't think off the top of my head how far those...
Well, if you're willing to read, I guess. I mean, some of the TIF districts were established in
1980.
70s, right?
Yeah.
Right, would you want something like from the last 5 years?
Or maybe the last 10 years would be good.
I don't know if that's all in one document.
No.
It wouldn't be.
No. Each one is a pretty thick document, so if you're wanting 10 years, you're going to have a stack of documents that's probably about 2 or 3 feet tall.
Excuse me, your staff, Mr. Raggett, said he'll go and get the documents, and so you can at least look at them while you're here and then
and see what you want to request.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
The request is for an accounting. This is how much we spend. As a consequence of that, this is how much our tax base has gone up. That doesn't seem to be 3 feet of paper.
Well, Mr. Kaufman, I'll tell you what. Since Mr. Regis is getting these reports, why don't you have a look and see if what it is you want? As I explained in the budget, if you just want a one-page accounting over a several-year spread, that's in the city budget, but that probably won't tell you what you want. I mean, I think you and I corresponded about this after you spoke at the last meeting, and I gave you a little short version of what had just been happening in the previous months. I don't know that there's a specific document already produced by the city that tells you exactly what you want, so you have the choice of looking through more extensive documents and seeing if the information that you are requesting can be found there.
Do you folks know if it's working or if it's not working? Is it bringing in more money than you're giving out?
The answer is yes, and beyond that, that's not an item for discussion tonight. So if you want to pursue this further, we can at another time. But obviously tonight we're not going to give you a TIF report off the top of our heads.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry if I could just make one more comment. This might help in looking at what comes back. To some extent, by definition, the answer to your question is yes, because the money that is expended is a fraction of the increased tax revenues that come in based on what the tax revenues were at the time the TIF district was started. So it's not a case of saying how much money are we going to put in, how much money are we going to put out, or how much money are we going to get back. It's a question of saying how much money are we taking in, what percentage of that money that we are taking in are we going to put back. So that may help in terms of looking at the net in and net out. This isn't like the city budget says, oh, we're going to spend $1 million on this and see what we get back. The money that is spent in the TIF district is by definition a proportion of the money that was generated by the increase in tax revenue. Now, the question you have to ask is how much would the tax revenue have increased if we hadn't had the TIF district? And that's, a question for I think everybody to answer individually, because it's to some extent unknowable, right? We don't know what would happen if we didn't have the TIF district. But by definition, the money that is invested in the TIF districts is money that comes back in the tax increment. In other words, the increase in taxes over what the taxes were at the time the TIF district was started. So I don't know if that clears or muddies the waters, but hopefully it'll help in interpreting the documents.
Well, if it's muddy, I'll come back and...
Okay. Well, great.
And last but not least, George Boyd, Rural Route 2, in Urbana, about Northeast County area.
Thank you for letting me speak. My name is George Boyd. I live in the county northeast of Urbana. And I just wanted to read these comments to you this evening. And I would like to refer tonight to the information we presented to you several weeks ago. And specifically, we gave you a map, a mobility map, We gave you copies of a petition and also comments and references to maps. So I'm going to refer to those this evening. We gave this to you several weeks ago concerning the proposed Trumpeter Extension Road between the I-74 University Avenue intersection and High Cross Road north of routes 150 and 130. We gave you a map section from the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan illustrating the fact that there is essentially no time savings in this proposed extension. The comment sheet we gave you with the map points out this fact. Please study both of them. We continue to object to the inclusion of this extension road as being of no value, as the existing state highway, Route 150, already provides more than adequate access with existing roadways. We already have full access south of 150 and High Cross Road. To continue to include this extension for a cost of tens of millions of dollars to provide no real benefit would be fiscally irresponsible. The residents northeast of Urbana and the county do not need or want this proposed road. The petitions we gave you copies of support our objections. Please remove this future roadway proposal from this 2005 comprehensive plan. This is Brown Index number 3 on the present Appendix E, February 17th mobility map. That's what I intended to say. I also wanted to mention that I just recently checked with the IDOT District 5 and found that, as I always suspected, that Route 150 became an active state highway between Danville and Urbana in 3 sections, the first being in 1918, the second in 1919, and the third and last section in 1921. This is a well-established highway which is perfectly good for any use we have today. And as I pointed out to you before in the material we gave you, the best time you could save by this new extension road for all of the money it would cost and the disruption to the neighborhood and the ecology and everything else would save you 15 seconds, which wouldn't really materialize because of the sight lines and the road that would have to take through the countryside. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Okay.
That concludes our public input, and now we can move right into the next agenda item, ordinance number 2005-03050, an ordinance adopting the City of Urbana Comprehensive Plan 2005. And we're going to hear from Rob Kowalski.
Thank you very much. It's been a long journey that we've been working on this plan for the past 4 years, and we are excited to present it to Council tonight for your consideration. And I know there are a lot of items that you want to discuss and get through, and there's a lot of public testimony that you're going to want to discuss, and I'd like to report on some of that. We gave you the plan a number of months ago in hopes that you'd have adequate time to go through the plan, become familiar with it. There is a lot of information. There's a lot of work on the part of the steering committee that went into that plan, and hopefully you've had a chance to do that. Just a reminder, we gave you a study session a couple months ago. We gave a study session to the Plan Commission. We also had a final steering committee meeting, which was preceded by a final public open house on February 8th. And then lastly, the Urbana Plan Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval of the plan with some amendments at their last meeting on March 17th. So the plan is in that format. Your staff report for tonight gives you that background and then also identifies the changes that the Plan Commission made. And I won't read through those because I think they're pretty straightforward, but overall their changes relate to the mobility map, which is one of the appendix maps, and then also mostly as it refers to the northeast unincorporated part of Urbana. And then also they adopted recommended language changes to the map that refers to Orchard Downs, and those were listed in your Plan Commission memo as well. What I want to do, I thought might be beneficial for you, is to give you some of the background of how the plan shows what it does for Northeast Urbana area, and then also how it shows what it does for the Busey corridor area, and to a lesser extent maybe the Orchard Downs area and the Urbana High School area. Since this has been such a long process, I thought it might be helpful to go through that a little bit. For the Northeast Urbana area, the current plan, what we currently have on the books right now, if we don't adopt this plan, this is what we're operating under, shows a future land use of a standard residential subdivision type of development for the area along High Cross Road north of the interstate. It does actually also show very small amount of commercial proposed on High Cross Road north of the interstate. And our current roadway map identifies a future improvement of the completion of the Trumpet interchange, and this is shown by a dashed line that extends from the Trumpet over to High Cross Road. The roadway map also shows a grid system of collector level roads that's proposed to about every half mile to coincide with development. We want to see collector level roads. This also is shown in the Northeast areas, crossing the Saline Branch in a number of locations. It's really just shown every half mile as standard north-south and east-west. That's what our current plans show. In 2002, we came out with our first cut at a future land use map, and the proposal was for Northeast Urbana was pretty much status quo of the standard residential type of developments, the Trumpet interchange extension, and even a little bit of commercial and multifamily at the end of the extension onto High Cross Road. That map, in fact, the overall format of the map was flatly rejected by the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, who wanted to see more analysis given to that area, to the land uses, and a little more consideration for the Northeast Urbana area. What resulted was the maps that you see in your plan now, that format where we have the aerial map in the background and the colors overlaid on top of it. We developed a new concept called rural residential, which is described in your plan as promoting just what it is, a rural residential type of growth pattern, perhaps where you have clustering. So instead of taking an area that has a significant amount of wooded area and stream corridors and simply dividing it all up into 5-acre lots, you might cluster some lots together and then have conservation areas or open space areas. That's described in the plan. So we developed that rural residential classification, and that is really shown for everywhere north of the interstate on the High Cross Road corridor. We eliminated any proposed future land uses of commercial, standard residential, or multifamily residential. We did identify the properties owned by the university as institutional, which is Brownfield Woods and Trelease Woods. As far as roadway connections, we still advocated for the Trumpet interchange connection, but we made it clear in the map that the intention for this connection was to serve development on South High Cross Road, south of the interstate. And as your maps show, the plans for that area show for some regional business developments and other mixed residential, what the plan calls mixed residential developments. We felt it is important to continue to work towards having better access to that area, but we wanted the plan to be clear that the purpose of this access was not to foster more traffic to the Northeast Urbana area. Also, by coming up with this new concept for the map, we were able to annotate the map, so we can annotate right on there intentions, and we gave a lot of reference to wooded areas and preserving natural amenities in the area. Following that, we developed goals and objectives, which I think added a lot for sustainability and environmental goals, and I won't reference any of those right now. But within the last 6 months, we developed the proposed transportation map, or what we're calling mobility map. And the first cut at that was really similar to the format of our old map, and I think it was it wasn't represented as well as it could have been, and maybe it was a little misunderstood as well. But it really followed the same format where we showed these collector level roads every half mile out in the mile and a half as a collector-level road needed. The intent of that isn't to start a roadway construction project where we're going to go out and start building these roads whenever money's available, but we really use that map when a property owner or developer or both come in and say, I'm thinking of taking my 60 acres and cutting it into 10 lots, and they unroll a plan and they've got this lot divided. We use that map to say, okay, the subdivision code legally allows you to do that, but if you're going to do it, we need to have a collector-level road serving this area, and that's a means that we can have them dedicate the roadway. That's really how that map is used. However, it was really looked at as sort of a construction document, I think. So what we did is we worked pretty intensely with mostly Professor Hopkins and other members of the steering committee to come up with a new concept for the mobility map, which you have in front of you tonight. And that concept isn't to show a bunch of lines every half mile bisecting the areas and crossing over the saline ditch in a number of spots, but rather to show these little blue triangles that say when there's development in these areas, there should be collector-level roads considered somewhere in the area of these triangles, and they can slide a little bit. It's not going to be, so you're looking at the aerial map and you see a house underneath, it doesn't necessarily mean that the collector's coming across your house. We took it a step further, and for the areas in northeast Urbana, we recognized the areas around the saline and specifically noted that we want rural residential types of roads here and not ones that are going to bridge the saline and compromise the natural amenities of the area. There will be a need for roads in this area. I think it's unreasonable to say we cannot have any new roads anywhere ever again. Landowners will continue to come in and propose some kind of development, although it may not be very intense, and that's fine, but there should be and will need to be public facilities to serve them. So the new mobility map really shows areas around the saline where we want to have roads that come out to High Cross rather than crossing the saline and cutting up the area. And obviously we want to manage transportation and access in that area so we don't have a situation where we've got 35 new homes on High Cross Road, and each one has their own driveway on High Cross, creating a transportation problem. So the map was really revised to reflect the natural character of that area, and I think it's a little more sensitive in that respect. The Plan Commission recommended some further changes, which you have in front of you, to really soften language about roads, specifically in northeast Urbana. We continue to advocate for studying the Trumpet Interchange completion. There has been a lot of public testimony over the last several months about scrapping anything at University Avenue and going out to Cottonwood and planning for an interchange there. There are also environmental concerns at Cottonwood, so that brought about a proposal to go out to 1800 East and propose a new interchange there rather than the other two. We continue to advocate that promoting interchanges further east than where we have development doesn't really jive, if you will, with the goal of compact and contiguous development for Urbana, and could actually promote a leapfrog style of development. But nevertheless, the Plan Commission felt that what we should be doing is further study of interchange opportunities to decide where is most appropriate, where would be most sensitive to environmental concerns, and what would best serve the area south of the interstate on the High Cross Road area. So the current mobility map that you have shows a little star at the Trumpet Interchange, at Cottonwood, and at 1800 East, and there's language that says when we are studying the need for interstate interchange improvements, look at all three of those and determine what makes best sense. So we've really gone from our current map, which shows a little line saying build a road here, to a map that says study all alternatives. So it's really a little more general, I think. Okay, that's kind of the background on the northeast Urbana and where we started from, where we are today, where we went, and what we have before you tonight. For the West Urbana area, I also want to go through the evolution of the plan for that area. One of the first concepts that we proposed was a future land use called traditional residential. And this was really for all our older neighborhoods, including West Urbana, the King Park neighborhood area, historic East Urbana, and all our other older neighborhoods. And the way that traditional residential category was described is that, kind of in a new urbanism sense, it's a neighborhood that would have a mix of uses, including single-family, multifamily, neighborhood-scale, commercial, and those all work together to form a neighborhood. And we designated, as I said, most of our older neighborhoods with that. We also described it as having an urban pattern of development. You're going to have connected streets, narrower streets, sidewalks that connect, street trees, something that's very walkable and very urban. There was a lot of confusion that we created with that category, traditional residential, because we indicated that in these areas you would have supporting neighborhood businesses and a mix of single and multifamily. It was looked at I think more in zoning aspects that this could lead to allowing, say, a commercial development at Illinois and McCullough or somewhere like that. And our steering committee struggled with that concept, and they ultimately asked us to come up with a different approach, and what came out of that is what you have on your maps now, where we have just residential. And the definition for that is primarily single family, and we break it out into areas where it's going to have an urban style of development, like West Urbana, the grid streets, the sidewalks, and where it might have a little more of a suburban style, say Myra Ridge or somewhere like that. And the plan I distinguishes the two of those. I would say we had about 6 or 7 meetings with the steering committee about this whole concept, and that's what we came up with. Another future land use that came out of that whole process was the concept of campus mixed use. This is, just to describe what the whole idea is, it's Gregory Place on Gregory Place between Oregon and Nevada. It's the mixed-use type building with an urban scale, close to the street, very pedestrian-oriented, architecturally significant, et cetera. There are areas of the West Urbana where we propose a future land use of campus mixed use. Again, this isn't zoning. This is areas where we'd say if this type of development is proposed, zoning could be considered as being appropriate for it. And this is mostly clustered at Green Street, Lincoln Avenue, Springfield Avenue, connecting campus to downtown, and we identify that as being a good transit-intensive corridor where you'd have that kind of development. There was concern about that category as well, and how far east it was proposed into the West Urbana neighborhood. So we had a lot of meetings about that with the steering committee over the past couple years, and met a number of times with the co-coordinators of the West Urbana Neighborhood Association to develop a map that was most appropriate for everyone. And out of that, we had a lot of discussions about the Busey corridor. What do we do in there? One of the concepts that we had talked about was that perhaps a townhouse or row house style of development could be appropriate. And we had different pictures of, what an urban style type of townhouse or row house could look like. It was proposed that we could offer that as an opportunity for redevelopment with design standards, et cetera. We talked about whether they could be 2 or 4 units. We went back and forth on that. And then we got into a lot of discussion about specifically which lots in that corridor it would be more appropriate for. 807 would be okay, but 806 was not for various reasons, and we went street by street. It got very tedious and really, much more detail than we expected to get into in the focus of a comprehensive plan where we're looking at the entire city. So that's where we took a step back, and we said, look, we generally think this idea could work for either reuse or redevelopment with this townhouse or row house style, but really we're talking about a parcel by parcel analysis, and that should be something we should do later on in more detail and outside the scope of this larger comprehensive plan. We met on that with the co-coordinators of the West Urbana Neighborhood Association. We developed the current map that is in your book right now, and they agreed, in principle to that map and that exact wording that's in the plan. That was back in July or August, and I haven't received any comments about that map until about 5 minutes before the meeting tonight. We presented at the February 8th open house, and there wasn't any testimony given on it at the Plan Commission or at the final meeting of the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. So I'm not as prepared as I would normally be for addressing concerns or changes on that map, but perhaps something for you to consider is the downtown to campus map that recognizes different future land uses, one of the things that we tried to do very carefully was make sure that the current maps that are in the proposed comprehensive plan are consistent with that map in the downtown to campus plan that recognizes future land uses. So we need to be careful about having, if we indicate that this large area needs to continue to use the downtown to campus map, that we don't have two maps that are competing against each other or maybe conflict with each other in some way, and the Plan Commission and City Council will have to determine which one to go with when considering a zoning change or some other kind of proposal. So that's something for you to consider. The other two, just briefly, Orchard Downs, there were some comments tonight, but I think for the most part, residents that came out at the Plan Commission meeting concerned about Orchard Downs are satisfied with the new language that we came up with on the map. What that language says is, and this is really in your Plan Commission staff report, but really says to consider the surrounding neighborhood more and the character of that neighborhood when doing this master planning for Orchard Downs. So we've been talking with the university recently about Orchard Downs, and I think they are going to be preparing a statement for you. They did commission some reports, some market analysis reports to be done, and that's what has been referenced over the last few meetings. But they have not accepted those as any kind of master plan documents or land use planning documents, and they still intend to start that process and coordinate closely with the city on doing so. Mr. Dempsey and April Getchus did meet with a couple residents, as you heard tonight, from the neighborhood and explained what their next steps are going to be, and my understanding is they are planning and open a neighborhood meeting within the next 3 weeks to get this process started and to further explain what their intentions are and how we're going to work together to develop the master plan. I think the comprehensive plan sets the stage the best we can to do that effort for Orchard Downs. I'm not sure how appropriate it would be to take it, too many steps further and start doing any kind of preliminary master planning for the site. We really set the stage. We want it to be a mix of residential, potentially some supporting neighborhood scale business, with recognizing the existing character of the area and keeping some of the assets of Orchard Downs area. So the Plan Commission was satisfied with the changes that we made there. And then finally, for the Urbana High School area, this is another area that we really haven't had a lot of comment on the map since we produced it a year and a half ago, but we did show the Washington Street and Iowa Street, with the exception of the Sunshine Grocery corner, as institutional, with recognizing the school district's intended plans of eventual long-term acquisition of that area. They, to my knowledge, have not formally adopted a master plan that states that intention, although it has been their long-term intentions to do this. In 2003, they commissioned a study of their campus facilities from Smith Group JJR. Their primary goal was to look at the existing campus that they have and try and figure out essentially how to fit 12 pounds of potatoes in a 10-pound bag for the softball fields and the soccer fields and all that. This is from their commitment to stay in the center of town, but yet to provide the needs for athletic facilities. The Smith Group was hired to do that. One of the maps that they did produce, which you have in front of you tonight, was I believe it's called long-term or future athletic map, which does show future expansion into the Iowa and Washington corridors with some park space and some parking. And again, I don't know if that map was officially adopted. I did speak with Superintendent Amberg this afternoon. He wanted to reiterate that they are committed to wanting to work with council and the city as they plan for the future, and that really their intention is the same as it's been for the last few years, to acquire properties only as they become available and as their funds allow them to do so. and it's really more of a long-term vision. So his preferences would be that at the very least it's recognized that the properties on Iowa be considered for future acquisition and institutional uses. So that's something else to talk about and consider tonight. And that's kind of another comment that's come up just recently, and we haven't had a lot of discussion about that over the past few weeks or anything. Okay, I'm going to stop there, take any questions, and I don't know, Ms. Pat, how you want to do this tonight. I know every council member has a long list of language changes, and some of it, we've had a chance to look at, some of it we really haven't, so I'm not sure how you want to orchestrate this.
Well, first we'll take questions, and again, if folks would just ask questions if you have questions. If you want to raise points, we're going to get to that next, and then we'll get a motion on the floor, and we'll start entertaining motions to amend from the different council members. Tonight is, I think most people know this, but tonight is a committee meeting, so no decision made tonight is final. And if the committee will likely send this to our next city council meeting, and at that time, a final decision could be made, or actually any two members could postpone consideration until the next council meeting, and a majority of the council could postpone consideration to whatever time they so choose. So we're going to start with questions, any questions that any council members have for Mr. Kowalski, which we will give a chance to get. Don't rush, that's okay. Does anyone have any questions? I'll start with Ms. Chenoweth and then Mr. Alex.
Well, first off, I want to just thank Mr. Kowalski, because this is a phenomenal effort. It's been 4 years, and you've been, carrying this project for 4 years. I think you've just done a great job. I have a couple of questions. You mentioned that downtown to campus plan references. Is it your intention to close out references to the plan such that the comprehensive plan kind of act as the newest version of that plan rather than referring to it in the comprehensive planning document? I was just trying to understand your comment there. Would you find it to be easier to do planning from here on out if there was no reference to the downtown to campus plan in the comprehensive plan, but instead more specific language about what is referred to in the downtown to campus plan?
The intention is that the new comprehensive plan replace the current comprehensive plan, of course, and the amendments that went along with it, which do include the downtown to campus plan, the King Park plan, a Woodland Park plan, but not the downtown strategic plan.
Okay.
We do propose that be continued as a part of the new comprehensive plan. We went through all of the existing neighborhood plans, if you will, and read through the goals and objectives of those neighborhood plans and referenced any maps that they may or may not have had, and tried to incorporate those to the extent that they needed to be into the new plan. And in some cases, like the King Park plan, if you read down through the to-do list, 98% of them have been completed, maybe with the exception of the neighborhood center. But most of the things had been scratched off the list and had been done. So to answer your question, yes, it would be folded in and replaced, if you will, with the new plan.
Okay. And then my second question has to do with the interchange. And this has been a line of inquiry for several months now, and I still don't I continue to have questions about it. Given that the Plan Commission has recommended these kind of 3 alternatives for future study, does this mean that if we were to pass the comprehensive plan as it is written, that we would be essentially directing staff to sometime in the future conducting an additional study that compares these 3 locations, in addition to the kind of standard access study that IDOT and the federal government would require before petitioning for funds? Or is it the case that those 2 studies could happen together, that the access study and the decision about what the best access point is could be done at the same time.
I think it was the intention that those two efforts would be done at the same time. Our current roadway map that shows the extension from High Cross Road, or the interchange to High Cross Road, isn't necessarily, the next step wouldn't be going out and pouring pavement. I mean, there have to be an environmental study done by IDOT to determine, should this happen, where should it happen, what design should it have, and is it needed. I think really the new plan continues to say, yes, we need to do that kind of study, but in addition to what we would normally study under environmental impacts study, we would want to look at these other two interchange opportunities as well and determine, does one of those two make sense better for our needs. I don't, that may be beyond the scope of a typical IDOT study a little bit, and Bill may need to help me out a little bit if necessary, but it's the intention of this plan that all three interchange opportunities be looked at together to determine and to validate one of them as being most appropriate.
That's helpful. So the study would be conducted by IDOT with local funds? How does that work exactly? And Bill and I started discussing this last week, so I guess this is follow-up questions for that discussion we had.
The study would not be conducted by IDOT. It would actually be a consultant that would work with IDOT and the city. But there are certain criteria that have to be met that the Federal Highway Administration requires and IDOT would require, and we would certainly impose certain parts of that study too. But the actual physical conducting of the study would be a consultant.
Okay, and then kind of last question on this topic. Is it your opinion that designating 3 locations in our comprehensive plan for future study would impede our chance for federal funding for an interchange?
No, I don't think that would impede our chances.
Okay. That's all for now.
I think one of the things we want to make sure is clear in the plan is that the map doesn't propose 3 interchanges.
I think that's not what we've been asking.
I know, and if you look at the map and you see 3 stars, you go, they must want 3 interchanges. But if you read the map and you understand it, it's clear that we want to look at all 3 of those together to determine what's most appropriate.
Okay. Thank you.
If there were funding for 3 interchanges, we would, anyway.
Mr. Alex?
A related question on the same subject. I have a dilemma with the interchange location problem, and I'm wondering if you can maybe suggest how what we're doing in the comprehensive plan here will address that. You made the comment that, we don't want to go way east of the city and build an interchange because we're encouraging sprawl, and I think most of us would agree with that. On the other hand, what we see in a lot of areas, including, for example, Windsor Road and I-57 in Champaign, is that an area where there probably ought to be an interchange didn't get around to being studied as a possible location for an interchange until development had built up around that location to make it prohibitive to build an interchange there. So we end up with things like, the interchange that probably should be located at High Cross Road, had they thought about this 50 years ago, gets pushed east to Cottonwood or pushed east to 1800 East, or in Champaign, the interchange that probably should have been at 57 and Windsor Road gets pushed south, I think, to Curtis Road is where it's going in, and so forth. So what I'm wondering is, my understanding is that the Plan Commission's recommendation is to take out the Trumpet extension as a future project designation or future roadway extension in favor of having these 3, basically saying, look, we know we're going to need an interchange out here someday, whether someday is now or 5 years from now or 40 years from now. What I'm wondering is if these studies typically happen when there is a need so great that federal funding is likely to be available to actually pour concrete, how is it that we can choose a long-term plan and take steps to ensure that the land is going to be available to build the interchange when the time comes, and that anyone who buys property in that area in the interim has knowledge that there is the intention of building an interchange there? Because I'm all in favor of saying we need to study this and determine where we're going to go, but I think a plan that says maybe there'll be an interchange here, maybe we'll extend University Avenue to High Cross Road, maybe we'll curve it around, maybe we'll put one at Cottonwood, maybe we'll put one at 1800 East, we don't know. It's great. It's a great way out for us as a city to say, well, we know we need an interchange out there sometime, someday, but unless we actually do sit down, even in the absence of federal money dangling in our faces to say, hey, we're come and get it, we ought to know what we're going to do out there. And so my question is, what do you see the comprehensive plan, or what do we need to do in the comprehensive plan to precipitate not only deciding that we'll study this someday, but to decide that we'll have a methodology for studying this soon enough that we can actually plan enough ahead that we don't run into the same kinds of problems we ran into here. I mean, if they'd bought this land, and if they'd bought what is now I don't think the actual interchange of I-74 and Route 130 is a particularly environmentally sensitive area. I hope it wasn't, because there's homes built on three corners and a road on the fourth. I think if we'd gone out there in 1950 or whenever they built I-74 and said, coming soon, not within your lifetime, but soon, High Cross Road interchange, we might not be having to address these issues. So what can we do to prevent that problem the next time around?
I think it's the intention that this study will happen sooner than later. And when I say sooner, I don't mean tomorrow, but it's not the intention that we won't get around to studying this for another 25 or 30 years, but that this study would happen sooner, and we would be able to look at all three of these locations and determine what is most appropriate. Beyond that, let's say, for the sake of argument, that it's determined that the University Avenue interchange is considered to be the most appropriate after looking at all three. I think beyond that, regular updates to the plan would also give us the opportunity to determine, should we be looking at a second interchange opportunity, and should we be doing something to ensure that in 25 years, the land is available to do this interchange, what will be the need. So I think the current study that we're talking about in this plan would happen sooner, and in regular revisions to the plan, we may have to be updated to look again further in the future. Bill, you want to?
Because my concern, I'll try to phrase this in the form of a question, because it is a question, although I'm trying to express my concerns. I guess I'm concerned. It seems like we can make a maybe weak to moderate case now for benefit associated with extending the University Avenue to High Cross Road, in the sense that there's a need to serve development that we see coming on High Cross Road to the south of 150. But as development continues to the east, and again, I'm taking a very long-term view here, that is going to make the value of having put that interchange in at High Cross Road less and less as we get farther east. So we can almost make the case that we don't want to go so far east as to encourage sprawl, but if we only get to build one, we're probably better off with an interchange at 1800 East than an interchange at University/High Cross, given that we already have essentially an interchange close to High Cross in the existing configuration of the University Avenue spur and University Avenue. So I'm not trying to advance an argument here as much as I am to say this is an ongoing planning process. In other words, if we decide now that we don't need any interchange right now, that there's not a compelling enough case to spend however many $1 million it is to connect this to High Cross Road, we still need to be thinking about where is the development going to happen to the east, and when are we going to, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me, and I apologize for making this so lengthy, but it seems to me like as the county continues to grow, there's always going to be a case for an interchange at every point along the interstate. And so as we try to pick the best ones, I guess what I'm saying is, if we do a study now and we decide that, well, okay, we need the interchange at High Cross Road, or we decide we don't need the interchange at High Cross Road, how does that affect the interchange sites to the east? I mean, is the time horizon for the comprehensive plan appropriate to the time horizon in which we have to plan ahead to know where these interchanges are going?
I think it is. We call for, one thing we haven't been doing with our current comprehensive plan is regular revision or take a new look at it. We did it 23 years ago and haven't really touched it except for 1993. But one of the things we call for is monitoring of the plan and regular take a new look at it every 3 to 5 years. And every 3 to 5 years, we should be asking that question again. And perhaps the next 2 or 3 times we do it, we will probably say, well, we did study it and we determined nothing was appropriate or High Cross was appropriate, and we made that decision, and it's not needed to be considered again. We might do that a number
Do you
of
think the
times.
language in the study, the language the Plan Commission has come up with regard to describing these as potential interchange locations, but we're only going to choose one, do you think that language is sufficient to encompass doing a study in the near term and saying there's a crying need for an interchange at High Cross Road and we better build it as soon as we can, as well as encompassing the notion of studying this in the near term and deciding, well, we don't really need an interchange at High Cross Road, but we don't think we need an interchange at all, but we're going to need one as things continue to grow. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it seems like this is a fluid process, and I want to know that staff is comfortable with the language not saying we got to pick one of these interchange sites and go build an interchange there, but in saying we need to be sensitive to the fact that there is a ever-growing need for access to the interstate, and it's up to the staff and Plan Commission and future councils to make an appropriate decision not only as to where it goes, but when.
Yeah, I mean, the language reads interchange alternatives when needed as Urbana grows east. And that's what the Plan Commission came up with. And, what does that mean when needed as Urbana grows east? I mean, you could argue that's today. You could argue, well, we're not really growing that much. It's not really needed yet. But I think it does leave some discretion to the City Council and to staff to determine at some point, say, okay, we need to look at that. And I think we're arguing that we need to look at it now. We need to look at these 3 locations and determine what's needed. There obviously is significant development that's proposed on High Cross Road south of the interstate and Walmart, and we'll have more down the way north of TK Wendell's, south of TK Wendell's. That's all in the next 6 months.
Sure.
So I think it's safe to say in the next 5 years we'll have significant development on High Cross Road, and we'll need to do that study earlier than later. But I think it does leave some discretion, and that's okay.
Do you feel that this is that the language that's in here and that the intent of this is sufficient to allow us to come to the conclusion that we don't need any of these interchanges right now, but we think we will need one in the future, and the best place in the future is here, with enough certainty that we could seek to acquire land or make it clear where we want this interchange to go soon enough that it'll actually provide some guidance not only to the city but to landowners and the public and IDOT.
I agree with most of what you said, except for the first part that says we don't need an interchange right now. I mean, I think that's part of the study.
No, I said that you think that the study is good enough to allow us to conclude that, or to conclude, or if we conclude we need an interchange, we need one.
Sure.
But it's not. We're not saying we got to go decide which of these 3 places we're going to build an interchange at in 5 years.
Right.
We're saying we're open to the possibility that it's not worth doing anything now, but it's worth doing it here enough that we're going to, at this specific site enough that we're going to go out and acquire land and
yeah, I think that's
try to give people some advance warning. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Roberts.
I appreciate, I think, the concept, perhaps, of putting a star on the revised, most recently revised map on 3 different locations to indicate that we haven't decided particularly sufficiently where a proposed interchange might be installed. But it would be perhaps it would serve the plan and allow a lot more latitude in final deciding if those 3 stars were removed. Because I think it's common knowledge that we have 3 major north-south highways or streets crossing the interstate that could be potential sites. And having 3 stars indicates a lack of being prepared to make a decision. And trying to eliminate 2 of them tonight or in the next week is not going to be an easy decision because we don't have a study done on what would be the most advantageous location. And I think that there's been a very seriously thought out and very considerate argument made by residents on North High Cross that we actually do have an interchange at High Cross Road, basically the I-74 University intersection. That intersection can easily be seen from High Cross Road. It serves incoming traffic from the east, funneling it into the Urbana area, onto where basically 4-lane, well-paved and serviced highways, University Avenue to the light, and then connecting to Route 150 if you wish to go to High Cross Road South. So I think that the idea that has been proposed by some, I mentioned here, that we have an existing interchange pretty much at the very location we are hoping to maintain one, which could be, whose use could be amplified and significantly improved by significant signage and directional signage along the route, could be an answer which would allow High Cross Road itself to remain pretty much as it is to the north, and still allow business traffic to arrive in High Cross to the south, and would allow the city to pick a part farther east when the expansion of the city allowed it to go to either 1800 East or Cottonwood Road. And I'm wondering if the city, if the Planning Commission has really thoroughly thought out the use of existing connections to High Cross as being an adequate and serviceable route that exists today with the development of better signage. Because you have basically a 4-lane highway all the way from the interstate to back to the intersection of High Cross and 150. And I haven't seen, or there hasn't been any discussion in the comprehensive plan that I've seen that existing roadways can suffice or can be accommodated to suffice. So is it the Planning Division Department feeling that that's not the case and there must be future planning
We
for
had that
connection?
discussion a little bit at the Plan Commission, but again, those are the kinds of questions that the initial study seeks to answer. Is this improvement even needed? Can you accomplish your goals with what you've got?
Right.
Is no build is always an option in these studies. So I think that's one of the reasons it's still advocated that these things be looked at and studied and may not be needed or may be needed. The analysis that Mr. Boyd presents is something that would be looked at in a study of alternatives. What is the cost? What is the access? The time savings, etc. It's difficult, in my opinion, to say, it would only be 9 seconds, so let's not put it on, let's not look at it at all. I mean, there's lots of areas of our plan, not just for roads, but for land use and everywhere else, where we say we're not sure what we want to do here yet, and we need to study it more in the future. And the option may be, the best option may be don't do anything. In road projects specifically, there's always a no-build option, if you will. So, the Plan Commission didn't get into a lot of detail about, specific signs and where signs could go and what impact that would have, but that would be something that would be looked at in a preliminary study.
Yeah, I realize that this document is meant to be a general guide and not the specific plan for the future, however, we found in the past, it seems, that we often refer to specific lines within these plans to justify our actions in the future. And so once you start writing something down and you have it in print, you can justify future actions based on what you've already decided, supposedly, when really it's supposed to be a general guideline. So that's why putting a star at each of these corners and saying that these are, planned constructions for planned roadway extensions, etc., set them in motion just by the fact that you've written about them in a certain way. And that's my concern, because we're not quite ready yet to make that big decision. We want to make it pretty soon, but instituting it into the comprehensive plan is somewhat problematic, I think.
Well, we learned the power of a line when the original proposal showed a flyover line of, build a road from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And like I said, your natural instinct is to look on the map and try and find where your house is, where the line is in relation to that house. So I think by using the symbol system, we're less specific on exactly where we want something to be, even though that was never the intent in the first place.
Well, you could just put a shaded bar from, High Cross south or east, and say, somewhere's here we're having an interchange. And it's just a concern, because sometimes what we think is a general guideline becomes, in fact, a plan of the future. And I have. It's not just this particular, project, but there's other issues in the comprehensive plan that we could go into crazy detail about, and it's probably not appropriate.
Ms. Wyman.
I just have one point of clarification and then one question, and I'll save my comments for the comment portion of council discussion. The first point of clarification is that regarding this area of Northeast Urbana and the Appendix E mobility map. Do I understand correctly from Mr. Roberts' questions and comments that in addition to figuring out whether we need a new intersection, there would also be a decision or discussion of whether increased signage alone would be sufficient to direct people to High Cross Road, which I think does need more signage as one alternative or possible alternative to actually paying the millions of dollars to institute a new intersection. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm speaking, and Bill, maybe you can back me up. I'm speaking to what would typically be done in a first phase study that would be done with IDOT and a consultant.
Yeah, that'd certainly be a component of it. Incidentally, I may have reported this before, but I have made a formal request to IDOT for more signage to direct folks from 130 to Interstate 74. They said they would accommodate that request, but it had to fall within their budget cycle, so it may be still a few months away, but at least they responded positively.
That would be wonderful.
May I jump in and ask a question? Does that also include signage from Interstate 74 to direct people to University Avenue and High Cross Road?
We didn't talk about that, but it was more US 150, Illinois 130, access to Interstate 74.
Because if you get off 74 going west, there's no way anyone could possibly know that they're supposed to make a left turn, since the sign that points them to the left says Charleston, and the one that points them to keep going west says Urbana. I think just everybody would keep going west and end up on Cunningham, which is a nice place to be too, but it won't get them where they want to be.
Yeah, we could talk about that. I know the signage is Illinois 130. Illinois 130 is High Cross Road. I suspect with their guidelines it may not fit within the direction for a street name versus a street route, but I could sure talk to them about that.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My question then is regarding on Appendix B, the future land use map on High Cross Road, south of where the regional business is located at 130 and 150. South of that area is a large tract designated mixed residential, and it seemed to me that in discussions, my understanding was that south of the proposed Walmart area and continuing south would be a business, some sort of regional or community businesses, as opposed to mixed residential. And so I'm curious just why that residential zoning is located there.
Well, actually, the Walmart would be located at the southeast corner of U.S. Route 150 and Illinois Route 130, and there's still a lot of space between the Walmart and Washington Street to the south. So the Walmart's not at the intersection of Washington and 130, it's further north. So that area in red, including the intersection of Washington and Illinois Route 130 is all proposed for regional business, and that Walmart's only a small piece of that.
I understand that. So, but there's, I guess my concern with that, but I suppose staff doesn't share that concern, or the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee doesn't share that concern, is that this area that's designated for mixed residential will, if it's zoned, or if the Comprehensive Plan calls for mixed residential, that might push other regional businesses that are seeking to locate, instead of going south to that area, south of Washington, would it push it north of Main Street, or not?
We did a significant amount of study of how much land we're actually proposing in this comp plan for regional business, and we thought, considering market demand, probable market demand, and our desired compact and contiguous goals, that this really represented enough space to satisfy our needs for regional business. And it was not the goal to have a regional business designation strip down High Cross Road all the way from Route 150 down to Windsor. In fact, if you did that, just thinking of scale, that would be about 3 times the length of North Prospect from the interstate to the movie theaters.
Okay.
And so, we did that little study and analysis and determined that this was really a reasonable amount of regional business that we wanted to plan for. I don't think that would push a demand north of Main Street. We do show a little bit of community business there. On the one side is where the Aldi's proposed, and the other side, I guess, is a little more speculative, just to round out an intersection. But one other note on the concept of mixed residential, of course, the idea here is that we would, High Cross Road is a busy, large arterial road, and not one that you would expect to have single-family homes backing up to.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of the mixed residential is that you would have, some higher density condos or apartments along the road transitioning to lower density as you move east a little bit.
And just following up on that, you don't think it would be better to have community business then along High Cross Road that would then buffer to the higher density and so on and so on? I mean, you think that there would be a market for the mixed residential on such a highly trafficked road?
I think it can work. The mixed residential can work next to the regional business. Again, this is a guide, and it's not intended to represent exact acreages, but those little pie shapes on each side of Washington represent something about the size of the Schnucks Plaza here in downtown. And I mean, I guess you can even make the argument that is something more along the line of a community business rather than a regional business. But those little pie shapes wouldn't necessarily, support a Best Buy and a Michaels and that whole kind of, major type of development center. That is, we plan for that more north of Washington, but then also, creating a node effect at Washington Street and High Cross. So,
thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Kowalski? I have one, and this regards Orchard Downs. I'm on page 85 of the planned future land use map number 12. I'm wondering if it's our expectation that, regardless of what's developed, that there will be a green space buffer, or I like to think of it as a linear park, across Florida and down Race Street. Would there be any problem with our designating that on this map, rather than having the whole rectangle just say mixed residential, having that say it within it, but actually indicating a green buffer on the north and on the east portions of that rectangle?
Well, we didn't propose to illustrate it on the map necessarily, but the revised language that the Plan Commission recommended adoption of also includes, for this master plan, you consider open space amenities and also the existing natural features of the area. And so, I mean, we didn't circle those areas on the map or on the aerial.
Is there any reason in the language, I was watching the Plan Commission and wondered about this too, if what you mean is is don't cut down any of the trees. Why don't we just say that? I mean, is there a reason for the sort of vague language of like maintaining? Is the language vague for the purpose of leaving flexibility in interpretation as to how much of it's maintained?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's if Orchard Downs is totally moved to some other location and that whole 160 acres is considered for some kind of redevelopment, the master planning process would determine what would be built where, of course, and the comprehensive plan would be used as a guide to say, look, when you're doing that, consider the natural features there, including the hill and the trees, and preserve what's most appropriate and what you can. I don't know if we want to go the necessary step of saying don't remove any trees on the site, but we tried to build that in as one of the criteria for considering in future development.
Well, yeah, I'm just wondering, because the bullet point provisions for, this is what was added by the Plan Commission, provisions for community open space and links to open space amenities does not say the same thing as maintain a green space buffer along Race Street. You could build right up to the street on Florida and on Race, and somewhere in that rectangle have a parklet and have easy access to that parklet down George Huff, and that would actually be consistent with this bullet point, but I don't think that's what was envisioned.
Most of the discussion related to two things. One was the open space that we have and how that's currently there and how it's used by residents, and the other one was links to other open space. So I guess hearing you read it again, it doesn't specifically address trees that are on the site or the hill, but that's something to consider.
Well, I didn't bring anything, I wasn't prepared to do this tonight, I was just thinking about it more when I was reading this, but if you would think about, if the council were so inclined and we were to change the map to specifically identify a buffer area, perhaps how many feet west of Race Street and how many feet south of Florida would be a reasonable buffer to, actually, I didn't call it a buffer. I like to think of it more of as a linear park, because that in a way is what it is. But how much of that green space would we want to lay out in our plan to be maintained in terms of measuring it in feet? Do you have a question?
I wanted to make a comment on that, I guess, and somewhat of a question. Is there a way that we can designate somehow in the comprehensive plan in a way that you think is both meaningful in terms of not necessarily being binding on the university, but sending a message to the university as to what our desires would be, but at the same time not be overly restrictive that could codify that? Because I've been thinking about this Orchard Downs issue as well, and I think something along those lines that maybe shows not necessarily, a 72.5-foot wide strip, but basically identifies the fact that there is already a multi-use path, which is essentially a de facto park along the west side of Race, and my understanding is their intention that there also be one along the south side of Florida that's already in fact, I think, in the Greenway and Trail Plan. If there is a way to identify that as an actual existing component of the comprehensive plan in that area, I think that would be very appropriate, because I think the sentiment that I've gotten is, people are not entirely opposed to commercial development at the site. People are not entirely opposed to amenities that are going to benefit the neighborhood. But the way in which we've traditionally seen commercial development is build it right up on the street with as many curb cuts as you can and parking right along the street. And I think that is inappropriate for that site. And I think to the extent that we can send that message that we want the university and developers to have considerable flexibility to build a development that they think is going to work for them and for the community, for the neighborhood, but that we don't think that sacrificing that existing amenity of that multi-use path with some green space along that street is an acceptable way to develop that parcel. I mean, is there a way in the comprehensive plan you think that we can address that, and is that something you'd be willing to look at?
I think the format that we set up, the best way to do that would be an additional bullet point under those, that the way we've done these annotated maps, master planning shall look at, and I think that would be an appropriate bullet point to specify. I think it would be more appropriate to do that rather than to try and draw something in or designate a shaded circle or something. And we could definitely look at that and talk to the university about what would be good language to add there.
Okay, I guess the point I'm making is that it's already there. This is not something we think maybe we someday want the university to put a park along Ray Street. There's already essentially a park along Ray Street. And I think designating that in the comprehensive plan, given that most of the other things in the comprehensive plan are there because of facts on the ground rather than plans on the drawing board, I think to the extent that we could make that designation, it would be appropriate. And I would ask that you talk to the plan. I don't want to abrogate the plan commission. If the plan commission or the comprehensive plan steering commission feels it's a terrible idea, then I trust you to say that. But I think I would agree that that's something. I'm saying this now because I don't think there's going to be an amendment proposed, but I think it'd be nice if staff had some guidance on this, and I would certainly like to see something like that happen. To try to say, yes, we think there's a large degree of flexibility in how the site can be developed that would be appropriate for the neighborhood, but a strip of commercial development along Ray Street is not something we could live with.
And I'll remind you, since we get a motion on the floor, although tonight's no final decision, so while it's good that so many people brought their proposed motions in writing so we can all see them, additional motions can be made, such as direct the staff to come up with the language on something.
Thank you.
And did you have a question, or did you want to start getting into discussion? Because if so, I'd like to get a motion on the floor first.
Well,
you really want to debate, don't you?
Well, I do want to debate eventually.
Okay.
But
Do you still have a question? If you do,
one more question.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
And it concerns the Orchard Down plans. The wording indicates that it's a mixed densities, single family. It doesn't indicate anywhere that we're trying to maintain or also provide a certain percent of a housing development in Urbana as affordable low income. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time to comment about the expected use of this mixed residential 3-mile swath of planning in the middle of the city, but I have a concern that this could end up being high-end, really pleasant neighborhood, townhousey kind of place, and we are totally ignoring again a section of the community that deserves to be considered, and I don't know if there's any condition in the plan that includes that overall.
Yeah, I mean, the future land use maps really indicate a type of land use we want, residential, commercial, a mix of densities. There are overall goals and objectives for affordable housing and, mix of incomes and neighborhoods, et cetera, but, we didn't get that specific on all of the maps and certainly didn't for Orchard Downs either. And we didn't think it was appropriate for our map to predetermine what should happen with the current Orchard Downs development or what should go specifically in its place, other than we do want a mix of residential densities and, as it reads, possibly some supporting neighborhood scale commercial businesses. And like I said before, I think that appropriately sets the stage for going the next step and determining, okay, what kinds of residential densities and what ranges of housing prices and who are they going to be sold to and, et cetera. And I think that's really getting into the next step, which is what our plan is calling for. But
And you feel the city will have an adequate voice at that next step?
I do. I think the university is making the efforts necessary to be all-inclusive about planning for Orchard Downs.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Whalen had to leave. He was not feeling well, and he requested that his absence be recorded in minutes as excused because of illness. Did I understand that right? Is that what he had asked for? Yes. Yes, thank you. Okay. 60, okay. Is the mayor somewhere around here? Well, we'll see him again. Okay. The chair will entertain a motion to approve. We first make a motion to approve the ordinance, and then make motions to amend it. So I'll entertain a motion to approve ordinance number 2005-03050.
I move approval.
I second.
Motion by Ms. Wyman, second by Mr. Roberts, and the floor is open. Let me say one more thing about procedure. This is just a suggestion so we can move through this. There are some proposals that are not controversial among us. I'm not certain which all of them are. But I would suggest if someone makes a motion and speaks to it and everyone is in agreement that there's really no reason to take up for time expressing one's agreement, we can just vote and move on. Of course, if you disagree, please do speak up. And in the interest of time, since we don't have to make a final decision tonight, if there are any proposals that are that might require more lengthy discussion, we can postpone consideration of a particular motion to the next meeting. We also have the option when we conclude in this item to send this to City Council. We could send it to another committee meeting. We could send it to Council and amend it at Council too, but those are your different options. And so I'll start with Mr. Alex.
I just wanted to make a comment for the benefit of the public that the motion as amended incorporates all of the changes that were taken by the Plan Commission at the March 17th meeting in terms of changes to the mobility map and the other things which have been described in the what we're calling the attachment.
Right, and then that was the intention of the mover and the seconder. Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Yes. Okay. All right. And Mr. Alex, did you want to make a motion?
No.
No. All right. Ms. Chenoweth?
I'd be happy to start with what I think are the easy items that I have. Okay. I make a motion that on page, this is in the document that I passed out, it's page 2. And it says changes to goals and objectives. It says, I'm going to take each of these and just kind of do quick votes on each of them up and down.
Excuse me, I don't think I have the document you're referring to.
The second page of the document that I handed out that has the
that says Urbana High School campus expansion on it?
Yes, look on the back side of that.
Thank you.
Okay, top of the back side, it says changes to goals and objectives.
Okay.
Page 35 under Goal 7, currently the goal is protect and beautify, it's supposed to say beautify, existing waterways. Add the, my motion is to add the following objective from the annual action plan for downtown. This would be an objective 7.3, redevelop parts of the Boneyard Creek to provide natural and public amenities.
That's the motion?
Yes.
Second. Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Ms. Chenoweth?
Second, under page 37, under Goal 12, the goal is preserve the characteristics that make Urbana unique. Change the sentence that says, under 12.1, that says identify and recognize neighborhoods and areas that contain significant historical and cultural resources. Change that to identify and protect, strike recognize, protect neighborhoods and areas that contain significant historical and cultural resources.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Ms. Chenoweth?
The third is page 42 under Goal 22. Goal 22 says increase the vitality of downtown Urbana as identified in the downtown strategic plan. Add and annual action plan for downtown, and add the following objectives from this annual action plan. 22.7, pursue redevelopment of the North Broadway corridor. 22.8, promote visible outdoor activity in downtown. 22.9, pursue the development of a permanent outdoor public square and performance/event space.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there discussion? Mr. Alex?
Just one question. Can you elaborate on the intention of 22.9 and how that would work with regard to things like the farmers market and so forth? And need a little more reality around that.
In the current downtown strategic plan, which was developed, I think it was voted on in 2002, as well as the annual action plan for downtown that was voted on in 2004, it states that there are long-term plans for the downtown to establish a basically a public green space that would act as a permanent kind of public square, outdoor public square, and specifically in these plans it refers to events, performances, etc. being able to happen in this place. In our downtown strategic plan, the specific location that is referenced, which really isn't referenced here, but the specific location reference is outside of Lincoln Square to the north and to the east of Jumers and to the, or what was formerly Jumers, and to the west of what is the post office. So basically, it's the attempt to try to fold in a few key points from these plans into the goals of the comprehensive plan. None of the things here are actually new priorities. They're just priorities that exist in these other plans that, although I've come to understand that the downtown plan will continue to remain an active plan in tandem with the comprehensive plan, I'd like to incorporate these few specific points into the comprehensive plan. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just to distill that, your representation is that this is language that's directly out of the downtown plan.
Yes, it's the language isn't verbatim quoted directly out of those plans, but it's in the spirit of what is in those plans. I don't think that the word permanent is in those plans, but I think all the other words are there.
I think the permanent was my concern based on the fact that we do street fairs and street corn festival and things where we're actually using things that are already there, and that maybe the most effective use of space would not be to have something that was going to be unused. Would this include potentially the multi-use plaza that's incorporated into the library project?
It could include that. I think that the intention in the downtown plan is, because the plan does reference the farmers market, it does reference events like the Sweet Corn Festival and the beer and chili cook-off. It also, in addition to those things, references the lack of a permanent 24-hour, 7 days a week, always there kind of public space that does not exist in our downtown, and the need for us to establish that public space. So this is in addition to those kinds of events, which we've done, I think, a good job of providing for with our streetscape and our economic development activities.
But this could be satisfied by saying, we're going to work with the county to make the area around the courthouse, or we're going to work with the library to make a plaza at the library. This type of thing could satisfy this requirement. Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion on this motion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Ms. Chenoweth?
And the last I will bring forward at this point is page 35 under Goal 6. That goal says that is to preserve natural resources and environmentally sensitive areas of the community. And I wanted to, my motion is to add the following objective, which I believe fits best between 6.2 and 6.3. And that objective reads as follows. I've added two sentences based on this conversation so far, which is encourage the county and Forest Preserve to acquire and develop publicly accessible natural areas along North High Cross Road to conserve this area and allow the general public to appreciate it.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Chenoweth, second by Ms. Wyman. And just for clarification, it's the words you have in writing, but instead of develop a natural, you have developed publicly accessible natural area. Is that correct? Okay. Does everyone understand the motion? Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Was there anything else, Ms. Chenoweth, while you have the floor, that you'd like to move at this time?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Roberts?
I have two areas of the plan I would like to make an amendment to. The first is has to do with Goal 12.0, which is preserve the characteristics that make Urbana unique on page 37. I would like to add an objective under that, and that would be objective 12.5. Preserve and maintain brick sidewalks and streets which are unique to Urbana's older neighborhoods.
Second. A motion by Mr. Roberts, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Hayes.
In regard to the sidewalks, is there any stipulation in there that is this residential or downtown?
Mr. Roberts, is this location specific at all?
No, it's not.
It's not.
The larger part of the brick sidewalks are in the west and east neighborhoods, but there are some, if you look at the brick sidewalk map, which I have actually brought a copy of it, somewhat contingent to downtown, I think is on the north side.
My question is, somewhere along the line of the discussion with the brick sidewalks, some of the neighborhoods had a choice whether or not they wanted to keep the brick sidewalk or give them up.
That's correct. And actually there is part of the ordinance, and I don't have the details of the ordinance, in which it stipulates that if, first of all, it had been passed by the city that it is desirable to maintain the brick sidewalks as a historical feature rather than take them all out and replace them with cement. But it's on a basis of what percent of the street, the sidewalk on a given street is already brick or already cement. And so there's a 60-30 ratio, and if 60% of the block is brick, you can maintain the bricks. That's my understanding.
If I can jump in here, Mr. Roberts, I think what Mr. Hayes might be referring to is that the city passed a brick sidewalk replacement plan.
Yes.
That identified basically some of the brick sidewalks, that there are some in my neighborhood and in Mr. Hayes's that will not be replaced.
And I'm aware of that.
And would you consider clarifying that in the language here to say something like consistent with the city's brick sidewalk plan?
Yes.
That's your intention?
That is my intention.
Okay, would that address your concern? Yeah, okay. Why don't we just add at the end of that sentence, the words consistent?
My intention is that it's an amenity of the city that is unique, which comes under Goal 12.0, but it is not actually addressed in any part of the comprehensive plan, and I think it deserves attention.
Okay, but would that be all right with you? 12.5, the objective you want to add said, preserve and maintain brick sidewalks and streets which are unique to Urbana's older neighborhoods, consistent with the city's brick sidewalk plan?
Yes.
That's your motion. Okay,
that would be my motion.
And that's it, acceptable?
Yes.
Okay. Is there further discussion on this motion? Mr. Alex?
Just one thing which I already raised with Mr. Roberts, but I wanted to discuss the council as a whole. My understanding is that the city's maintenance plan for these brick sidewalks is such that the resulting maintained sidewalks will be wheelchair usable. Is anyone aware of whether that is true or not?
Well, to the greatest extent possible.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, just with the constraints of a brick sidewalk, sometimes they're not as accessible as concrete sidewalks, but if you see the ones that have been done already, they're very smooth for brick sidewalks. So they are accessible, but as they are brick sidewalks, they can settle and so forth much more easily than concrete. So there's that downside as well.
The reconstruction of the brick sidewalks, which is the plan of the city, is such that the bricks are removed. The substrata, which has deteriorated and caused the slumping of the bricks in unusual and non-conforming ways, is removed. A new rock crushed ground is established. A fabric plant barrier is laid in. Sand is put down. The bricks are aligned, and then they are mortared in place with a mix of sand and cement. So the result is a 98% improvement over the surface of the sidewalk. They are not any more dangerous or slippery than cement. And if you look at the ones that have been replaced in the East Urbana neighborhood on California, they also already have, some of them have wheelchair accessible cuts replaced in the corner accesses on the street side so that you can go from the street up to the sidewalk, which are the standard ones that are being replaced throughout the entire city, whether it's brick or cement. And so those kinds of conditions as assistance to the handicapped are in place. And I'm including this with the goal of pursuing and continuing the process of replacing the sidewalks on a long-term basis.
Thank you.
And Mr. Roberts, would you clarify, on the page that the written version of this, you have, in addition to what you stated, add an implementation strategy, which is maintain a program to rebuild and relay deteriorating brick sidewalks, and some other fill-in for type of strategy 15-year plan adopted in 1998.
Yes.
Is all that part of your motion as well? Or were you wanting to
That's the
use that
second part of the motion.
Okay,
and
all right.
it would be placed in a cell on a different page.
Okay, all right. Well, then we'll just deal with this first. Is there any more
That's
discussion
right.
about this motion? Okay, hearing, Mr. Hayes?
That's all well and good as much as can be handled for the handicap.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of those streets, we have these large roots from the trees that'll come up and disturb the sidewalk. And people just gonna have to understand that you can't do it in all situations.
I think that there are plans, or there are techniques in which Phil can, they have ways in which they can modify upraised roots, and they can be chipped away in some ways, or there's a way of mounding earth to make somewhat of a ramped approach to these areas. And so that is actually has been considered and is under the person who would be reconstructing the sidewalk would take that into consideration and appropriately handle that project. And this is not any situation that is not also happening to some cement sidewalks where a seam will be upraised an inch higher than the other due to a root infestation, if I could use that word.
I'll also mention in my neighborhood, I forget whether it's on Oregon or Nevada, there's at least one place where the sidewalk goes around the tree.
And that's also part of the plan.
That's all very level, yeah. Yes. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Roberts?
This additional information, which includes implementation strategy, type of strategy, related goals, related maps, timing, response cycle, responsible city agencies, and other, was intended to be added on the bottom of page 94, which is part of the implementation program of the goals of the comprehensive plan. And I think that was the page I was going to add it on to. I guess it doesn't really matter where it gets added on to. And anyway, it just was a carryover of some of the ways of implementing the goal, which seemed to be appropriate since we're setting goals and we're also trying to include ways of implementing them. So do you want me to read this verbatim?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. As part of the implementation program, strategy, maintain a program to rebuild and relay deteriorating brick sidewalks in Urbana, identifying streets to receive renewal on an annual basis, establish a regular maintenance program for Urbana's brick sidewalks. Type of strategy, a 15-year plan adopted in 1998. See, that's already been adopted. Related goals and objectives, and I list several: 1.0, 2.4, 11.2, 12.1, 12.4, 12.5, 22.6, 42.5, 46.0, 46.1, 46.2, 47.0. These all relate to the goals of that plan. Related maps, well, maps 8 and 10, which is west and east Urbana. And then I also mentioned that there is a brick sidewalk map, which has been part of the Capital Improvement Plan 2004. Timing, ongoing 15-year master plan, responsible city agency, Public Works Department.
Second. Motion by Mr. Roberts, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Alex?
Just one. It is the identifying that you want to have happen on an annual basis, not the renewal. Is that correct?
Well, what I'm trying to achieve here is that each year, indeed, brick sidewalks will be worked upon. We have a 15-year plan in place already with the city, but it's not guaranteed that brick sidewalks will get funded every year, because it's a general sidewalk revenue plan or funding plan, and up until 2 years ago, that's like over the last 90 years, only cement sidewalks have been worked on. Brick sidewalks have never been worked on. So I'm just trying to encourage or set into place in this provision a fact that in each following year for at least 15 years, some brick sidewalk will be repaired.
I think you want to say identifying on an annual basis streets to receive renewal, because what I'm reading here is we're going to pick some streets and we're going to renew them every year. I don't think that's what you mean.
Okay, well, I would accept that as a favorable.
Okay.
Is that language, Mr. Alex, would be identifying?
I would take on an annual basis and move it between identifying and streets.
Identifying on an annual basis.
Streets
to receive renewal.
Okay. Okay, just a rewording of that.
That's acceptable.
I accept that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, wonderful. Any further discussion on this motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
Then I have one other. And this has to do with the future land use map 10, which is the historic East Urbana. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a pink box with text in it, which sits south of Main Street and east of Vine. It reads, "Encourage more intense development closer to downtown core, neighborhood plan to determine appropriate boundaries." I'd like to strike that and replace it with this wording: "Encourage development closer to downtown core that reflects neighborhood plan identifying compatible growth opportunities while preserving the low-density residential quality of the neighborhood. Neighborhood plan to determine appropriate boundaries and desired development."
Second.
Motion by Mr. Roberts, second by Ms. Wyman. And is there a discussion on the motion?
I'm just saying that the city has not really defined the degree of intensity or the manner of development that is desired in this particular corner of the East Urbana neighborhood. Conversion of homes on Elm Street from single-family to multifamily residence has already taken a sharp upswing, losing basically residential single-family homes. Residents in the neighborhood advocate preserving lower density occupancy in this fragile transitional area within the neighborhood boundaries, including downzoning. And so while recognizing the commercial potential of East Main Street, residents wish to control the impact of residential demolish and rebuild projects on Elm Street. And that's the purpose of this rewording.
And may I ask a question before, and then I'll recognize you, Ms. Chenoweth. The words neighborhood plan, are you referring to an existing neighborhood plan or the neighborhood plan needs to develop?
There's a neighborhood plan. The historic East Urbana neighborhood plan was submitted to the city already and expresses some of the concerns of the neighborhood.
But that was something that was submitted but not adopted?
I would say so. Yeah, you could. I'm sure you could.
Kind of a white paper
Right.
submitted by residents of the historic East Urbana. There is an implementation item in the plan that does call for, in conjunction with the neighborhood, to develop a plan that would be adopted by the city council.
Okay, and I'm wondering, just to clarify this motion, since this is going to this document, if there should be a more clear identification of what this refers to. Encourage development closer to downtown core that reflects
the historic East Urbana neighborhood plan, comprehensive plan, that was what it's called.
Should be adopted, it's yet to be adopted.
I see,
Okay,
yes.
so that, maybe that,
Okay.
that reflects, maybe you should say that reflects a neighborhood plan to be adopted.
When adopted.
Pardon? When
Well,
adopted?
when adopted.
Or when adopted, okay. Would that be all right with you, Mr. Roberts?
You could say pending plan, or, yeah, yes, actually that wording would suffice.
Okay. So encourage development closer to downtown core that reflects a neighborhood plan when adopted, identifying compatible growth, et cetera. Okay.
Yes.
Is there further discussion on the motion, Ms. Chenoweth?
Does your motion include a change to the map designations? Or would the pink stay pink and the yellow stay yellow?
The pink would stay pink.
Are there any other discussion on this motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. We're making good progress. Is that all, Mr. Roberts?
It is. Thank you very much.
Ms. Wyman?
I just have one small change tonight. If council members could note, I did have a memorandum that was on your table. Actually, I've made corrections or changes to that based on what I realized was a misunderstanding over the phone, what that language was, and I've just passed out to you all changes. It starts with page 98, implementation program item, which should look familiar because it's what Georg Holte referenced from the planning department, community development services memo, the section of which starts March 24, 2005, to Bruce Walden from Elizabeth Tyler, but it actually is part of what is the attachment 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan Commission Action, March 17, 2005.
Does everyone know where we're at? This is in the packet you received for tonight's meeting. It's the second to the very last page for this is a map, and this is the second page before that map. Does everyone know
Does that
where
make
we're at
sense?
now?
second page before that.
Yeah,
The
that's
second to
right.
last page for the map.
The attachment.
Yeah, right, the attachment,
Okay.
all the way to the end, and it says on the top, page 98, implementation program.
Yeah.
Okay, what Ms. Wyman circulated is a photocopy of that with the changes that she wants. That's the way she's putting motion. You understand,
And-
Mr. Polsky? Okay.
And I guess I'd like to make the motion as reflected by the handwritten scrawls on that page that I just passed out.
Which would be under
Oh,
implementation
sure.
strategy, adding the words design, location, or study potential roadway projects, identify the mobility map to determine design, location, function. The motion is
And
to
then-
add and environmental and ecological impact, and to add that same language again on page 108, where it says similar things, and again on the points, on the memo that say revise the mobility map, the first bullet point, again, has similar language. It says reword this is the direction from the Planning Commission, reword the description beneath this title to read as follows, quote, projects identified as needing additional study to determine design, location, before it said and function, and this change would say function and environmental and ecological impact.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Wyman, second by Mr. Hayes. Is there discussion? Mr. Alex?
One question. Would it be appropriate, and I had problems with this wording too, would it be appropriate in your page 102 and page 108 modifications to add, after the word determine, to add necessity? Because once these became optional projects, it seemed that the thing that we wanted to determine wasn't necessarily just design, location, and function, but whether or not they were worth doing at all.
I think that's a great idea. I'd like to amend that then to include that should be at 102, page 102, 108, and then also that first bullet point under Appendix E, mobility map.
I'm not married to the word necessity. If you wanted to say value or benefit or something that made it imply that we might do it even though it wasn't absolutely necessary, I'd be amenable to that. But I think we need some type of a value judgment in there as well as
I think
physical
the
concerns.
necessity, the addition of the word necessity works out perfectly. I think that's great.
Okay.
So the change, and is that, Mr. Hayes, is that acceptable to you? Okay, so the change would say to determine necessity, comma, design, comma, location, comma, function, and environmental and ecological impact?
Yes.
Everyone
Yes.
understands that? Good, okay, this motion, is there further discussion on the motion? Ms. Chenoweth?
Your original memorandum states both environmental and economic impacts, and I liked that motion that you didn't make. I guess my question to you is, why is economic impact not included in here, given that it would be, it's an important piece of what we've been talking about. I mean, really, the only reason we'd ever have an interchange at this location is because of economic and transportation impacts. Otherwise, we might as well forget about it and just leave it as is. So, is there some reason why you chose to take the word economic out between when you passed out this memorandum and when you photocopied this?
I guess, one point of view is that economic is understood, but I think that I'm fine to add it if you'd like. We could add it to something like to determine, good, so it would say study potential roadway projects identified on the mobility map to determine necessity, design, location, function, economic and environmental and ecological impact. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
We do that at all three places, and Mr. Hayes, is that all right?
Okay, so the motion now reads all those things, necessity, design, location, function, economic, environmental, and ecological impact.
A mouthful.
Is that okay?
Actually, I consider environmental and ecological, so it would be economic and environmental and ecological impact. Unless that doesn't, you're the
It doesn't matter. Okay, it's function, economic, and environmental and ecological impact. Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
Okay, well, all right.
Sorry.
All right, everyone clear on what we're voting on? Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. I have a motion, but unless there's something, Mr. Alto, you ready with yours?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you go first.
I have two. The first one is an amendment which would go under Goal 30, which is the existing goal reads develop a comprehensive approach to economic development. This new objective would be objective 30.8, support regional, state, and federal efforts to promote high-speed and standard-speed intercity passenger rail connections serving Champaign-Urbana.
Second. Motion by Mr. Alex, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Alex?
The next is a proposed amendment which would go under goal 27.0, that is create a variety, the existing goal is create a variety of industrial and office developments that can benefit from existing amenities such as convenient access to interstate and rail services and close proximity to the University of Illinois. This amendment would be objective 27.5, preserve and promote opportunities for rail access for existing and future industrial users in East Urbana and east of Urbana. I have received some comments from council members that indicate that this is that there are some concerns about this. So what I'd like to do is present this tonight, just so everyone is aware that it's been presented, solicit comments, and
postpone consideration.
And postpone consideration of this until the next opportunity. It is my intention in presenting this not to say we need a lot of industrial development in East Urbana, but rather to say that the fact that we have a unbroken rail corridor that runs from Danville to Bloomington and passes through Urbana is something that once lost is not easily restored, and that as the economics of energy costs and transportation needs continue to shift in favor of carrying things by rail rather than by over-the-road trucks, I don't want to see us in a situation where we're making a short-sighted decision that would cause us to lose the ability to serve industrial uses wherever they may be only by road as opposed to by rail. So that's my intention in proposing this, and I would be happy to entertain comments at this point or in the next week.
A second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Alex and second by Ms. Wyman. Is there discussion on the motion? Ms. Chenoweth?
I've had some back and forths with Mr. Alex over this, and my concern is that as written, it appears to conflict with the greenways and trails as well as the downtown plan. I hear what it is that he's trying to accomplish, and I don't yet feel like the language as written accomplishes that without creating this conflict in our comprehensive plan that says, on the one hand, we want these paths and we want these trails and we want to incorporate the greenways and trails program and look at this as a rail to trail program and look at the corridor in downtown as a potential connector between Carl and Pravina and the downtown area. It right now as written, it kind of conflicts with that, and so I haven't, we've been going back and forth on email. I haven't come up with alternative language at this point, but I do want to air that concern at this point to other council members, and perhaps, if you put your brains on it, you'll think of ways in which both things can be accomplished. I'm not actually sure if both things can be accomplished. You can't have a train next to a trail, as far as I know, and I also know that currently Solo Cup uses that spur, and I believe intends to use it into the future, despite the fact that they've closed down the executive kind of office component of Solo Cup. They will continue to use the factory component of Solo Cup. So that's my statement at this point.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Alex, go ahead.
I'd just like to respond briefly to that and say that I have a memorandum which I've submitted to council. I am sympathetic to that argument. I think I would also like to see the trail that was proposed in the downtown to campus master plan between Carl and downtown, and I would like to see a way in which we could have both a trail and maintain this rail amenity. My actual reason for proposing this came out of going back and reviewing the downtown master plan, because at the time that plan was adopted, I objected to the notion that the rail was basically just waiting to be abandoned and converted to a trail, because I think it's very important to maintain that rail amenity as we move forward. And I would like to explore a way that we could meet the needs of the trail between downtown and Carl without making the automatic assumption that highways are there to be expanded and rail is there to be abandoned. And so I would solicit any comments from other council members as to how we might be able to achieve both goals. Along most of that corridor, there were actually multiple railroads at one time, so the amount of unbuilt land, I think, is more than sufficient to create trail amenities. But some of that land has gone to the city and been utilized for parking lots and other use, so it might take some creative planning to determine how we can do both. Again, my concern is basically some comments that I've received from city staff subsequently have indicated that city staff would like to see that railroad gone because it makes certain parcels difficult to develop. I hope the council will find the comments in my memorandum compelling to argue that the maintenance of this corridor and this amenity are more significant and should have a higher priority than the inconvenience imposed on a small number of parcels by the existence of this rail.
I have a question for you, Mr. Alex. When I first read this, I wrote back to you, I said, sure, I support this. I believe this was the same thing that you had sent out. My understanding of the whole rails to trails is that when the railroad abandons the rail and they are using it no more, then that's when we have opportunity to do the conversion to a trail, and that it's not really our call when that happens. So if, as long as they're using it, it stays a railroad, which is something that I agree with you we should not be working against because it has a function. Is your intention with this motion to encourage that even if the railroad were to abandon the track and no longer run any trains on it, that we would still want to preserve the track in the event that they change their mind in the future, or someone else who used rail would want it?
It's the intention that the corridor be preserved, and the notion there is that we can't foresee, 50 or 100 years from now, whether someone might want to serve an application in East Urbana or in Champaign County east of Urbana by rail. You are correct in the sense that as long as there is, as my understanding is, any active customers on that rail, that the easement remains in place. And in fact, the federal government has supported the Rails to Trails program for the very reason that they would rather see rail corridors that are abandoned be, in effect, land banked and used for trails rather than lost and reverting to hundreds or thousands of original landowners, which would make them very difficult to reassemble. So I think that basically whether it's a trail or whether it's a railroad, as long as it's a corridor that could be utilized for rail access at some unspecified point in the future if it becomes necessary, that's fine. I think the thing I'm trying to communicate here is that if someone were to build an industrial use in East Urbana or an existing industrial use in East Urbana or east of Urbana decided it is more economical and more environmentally conscious of us to ship our goods by rail rather than by road, it's easy to build a road to a factory because you just build a turnoff off an existing road. It's much more difficult to build a railroad because you have to be able to get to an existing railroad. Currently, this is the only such corridor in this area of Urbana or even this area of Champaign County. So that's my concern. I'm not saying that we need to supersede the desires of the railroad as to whether or not track exists in this corridor, but to say that comments that I've heard to the effect of we're just waiting for this to be abandoned so that we can develop something better at university, so we can build a hotel at University or Lincoln or something like that, is not a responsible planning attitude in the long run. So I think that to some extent, I think this may well be compatible with the rail to trail plan as well. As you know, that most of this railroad, which originally ran from Urbana to Danville, is being considered for rail to trail because there's actually not any. Their active railroad ends at Smith Road, but the right-of-way continues to Danville. And so, again, this is being looked at under this rail to trail provision with the understanding that if there was a need for rail service in that area, that could be provided at some point in the future. But that is moot if in Urbana this is abandoned and blocked someplace between East Urbana and Champaign.
So you would consider replacing the rail with a trail, you would consider consistent with this goal. What you would consider inconsistent would be building a structure, an improvement on the land that would...
That is correct. I mean, I do feel that it's in the city's economic and environmental interest to promote businesses that can economically ship by rail rather than by truck to do so. So to that extent, I'm not saying, it's okay if the rail goes away as long as it becomes a trail. I'd say it'd certainly be my preference that landowners of East Urbana businesses have the opportunity to continue to use this rail access. But obviously, if the economics are such that nobody wants to use it, then it's not going to. We're not in a position to tell the railroad you have to keep this here just in case somebody wants it. Although it does increase the value of these properties for industrial development.
Right. Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of what some reconciliation between your position and Ms. Chenoweth's as to whether they're different or not. You definitely want to keep the corridor, or the path open, not built on. You want to keep the rails in the ground as well?
I would say we should encourage the rail to remain there as long as it's economic, as long as there is an economic value to industry to use it.
If it were covered, but could then be dug up at a later date, is that?
Well, no, I mean, putting the rails back in is not a big deal. If the corridor's there, I mean, if Solo Cup were to go away and nobody in East Urbana were to indicate that they wanted to use this thing and it sat there for 5 years and the railroad said, okay, we're done, filed with the federal government for the right to abandon it, and went and took up the rail. If in the future, somebody did redevelop the Solo Cup site with sufficient volume that they said we want to have rail access to this site, then the railroad would be able, under the Rails to Trails agreement, to be able to put the tracks back in, which is incidentally another reason why we should look for ways to have rails coexist with trails. I mean, we don't say we're going to do road to trail and we should be petitioning to tear up US 150 to Danville so we can turn it into a trail. I think equal consideration should be given to the railroad rights of way.
Okay.
And as I said, I would prefer to postpone this. I think we can probably come up with wording that'll be unanimously acceptable. I just want to make sure that it's got before the public today and before the council, so if anybody does feel strongly about one way or the other about the overall concept, they have the opportunity to be heard, and I'll present this again, or we'll take this up again at the next opportunity.
Okay, so there's a motion to postpone, or is there any, further discussion? No, go ahead.
Move we postpone consideration on this motion to the next time the issue of the comprehensive plan comes up.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Wyman, second Mr. Alex. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that. I apologize for the lengthiness of that discussion, but I appreciate the input from the council.
That's quite all right. I have a motion. Does anybody else have one? I'm going to wait. No? Okay. I circulated this to you, too. My motion is, the basic thrust of it is to eliminate the designation of the Lincoln-Busey corridor from Illinois to Ohio as a study area, and this would involve the following changes. On the land use maps on page 81 and on page 82, those are land use maps 8 and 9. The area that's shown as residential designation that ends at Lincoln, that ends at Busey would be extended the additional block to Lincoln Avenue. Remove from each map the text that says continue to use future land uses identified in downtown to campus plan. See Appendix A. Further study Lincoln-Busey corridor to determine optimal land uses and potential use for development of specific properties. And the third change on each map would be to replace under the strategies for neighborhood stability the statement that says further study Lincoln-Busey corridor, replace it with the language continue to use future land uses identified in the downtown to campus plan. The two other changes related to this would be on page 90 under implementation program to remove the strategy study zoning and land use along the Lincoln-Busey corridor from Illinois South to Ohio Street, et cetera, and finally to remove Appendix A on page 106.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Pat, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there discussion? Ms. Chenoweth.
To try to be brief, I don't support this as written, and it's different than what I expected you to be bringing forward today in the following way. In our discussions, I was told that the half of the block between Lincoln and Busey that resides along Lincoln would be designated something other than residential, and that the half that was along Busey would be designated residential in your motion, and this is different than that. It makes residential go all the way up to Lincoln. I have not heard, both in public testimony tonight as well as in my conversations about this issue, a desire for people to, from the neighborhood, to stipulate Lincoln Avenue as this, as this kind of light-colored residential. But rather that it be the Busey corridor that would be designated as such. That's concern number one. I generally agree with the spirit of the motion, so it's a matter of whether or not amenable to changing the designation along Lincoln Avenue as to
What would
whether
you
or
like
not
to
you could find-
designate Lincoln Avenue as, if not residential?
Uh,
Since it's all built up and it's all residential, what would you like to change it
No,
to?
it's built up as multifamily or campus mixed use. I'm not sure which it would be, but I would be interested in staff's input on that. But it would not be low-density residential. It isn't low-density residential, and it's a major street corridor, so it doesn't make sense that we would designate it as residential in that area.
So residential to you means single-family residential. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, that's how it's actually indicated here, that single and low-density residential is indicated with a light-colored yellow, and when you get to the areas that are multifamily residential, it gets darker orange, or multifamily is orange, and then campus mixed use is the dark yellow. So if your intention is to take the light-colored yellow and extend it to Lincoln Avenue, I don't see that as the consensus.
Okay, so if on Lincoln Avenue it were multifamily, which is that orange that you're looking at on the maps, just on Lincoln Avenue itself, and on the rest of the space between Lincoln and Busey were residential, is that would you support that?
What I'd want to know is particularly from staff whether or not the recommendation would be campus mixed use or multifamily. As I understand it, walking along this corridor on a regular basis, it may actually fit campus mixed use better simply because it includes small offices and businesses and residential and upper floors, et cetera. So,
okay, we need to discuss this another time. I didn't realize that there was an intent to change that. So I'm going to make a motion to postpone consideration.
If I can make a comment first, I think I may have a way out of this. I think the coloration is the future land use. Is that correct? I mean, is it protect land use? I think the language that is there right now, continue to use future land use as identified in the downtown to campus master plan, or downtown to campus plan, basically leaving that finger uncolored and essentially subordinating to the downtown to campus master plan is probably the most appropriate thing to do there. To say we know this is a mix of uses, it's already been set forth in the downtown to campus plan what those uses are, and we don't need to study it, we know what's there. I would say that rather than argue over what color it would be, we should probably leave it no color in the recognition that it is mixed use and continue to keep that language, continue to use future land uses identified in the downtown to campus plan. My assumption was that the reason it wasn't colored and had that language was because the steering committee couldn't decide what color to color it either.
The reason it has no color is because the steering committee initially recommended setting aside the downtown to campus plan and slating that entire area for multifamily development. That's as Mr. Kowalski explained earlier.
Right.
And many people in the neighborhood were upset about that. Two members of the Western Band Neighborhood Association negotiated with Mr. Kowalski for this study area, and that was sort of the compromise to make the whole issue go away till another time. Making the whole issue go away till another time is exactly what I'm trying to prevent. The campus to downtown plan, or the downtown to campus plan, was not a promise for 10 years. It was supposed to be a promise forever. Preservation is not something you do in the short run. Preservation is long run. And the idea is to freeze the, like if you take the language out of the campus to downtown plan, that the land use recommendation, the city has indicated its desire to preserve these uses, as this is talking about the Busey corridor, as they now exist, while precluding further encroachment of higher density buildings into this unique residential corridor.
Would you promote the solution that I'm proposing, which is to identify that area as it's identified now, which is continue to use future land uses identified in the downtown to campus plan, removing references to studies? Because that sounds to me like what you're asking for.
Well, yes, actually, the language continue to use future land uses identified in the downtown to campus plan would be fine. Leaving no color in there would not be fine, because that identifies that as an area that doesn't have a designation like all the other areas. And if you look at the zoning map, which is really the best, maybe the best language would be to say maintain current land uses under the 2005 zoning map.
But isn't
because
that
almost
based on
all of Busey Avenue, see what this is all about, is almost all of Busey Avenue is single family. And Lincoln Avenue is multifamily, and it's zoned for a mix of R7 and R4 and R5. And then on the cross streets in between is a mix. And that was very carefully done after an extensive study 15 years ago. So that should be preserved. And if you designate Busey Avenue as anything other than residential, which is what it currently is used and zoned as, in fact, it's almost all single family, then that's actually indicating a change.
Isn't that
the
how
idea is to not change it.
Isn't that how it's designated in the downtown to campus plan, though, as residential? I guess what I'm saying here is, why don't we say, or in that Busey finger, see downtown to campus plan.
Ms. Chenoweth.
I had two concerns. I didn't get to the second concern. The second concern is that is Mr. Kowalski's concern about incorporating another external plan into this language. And so it makes complete sense to me from a planning perspective that we would take the elements that we want of the downtown to campus plan, fold them into the comprehensive plan so that we don't have the public and new council members and staff continuously referencing some other plan. So as written, the second reason why I can't support it at this time, this evening is the first time I actually read this particular language that you put before us. The email that I received did not necessarily stipulate, it stipulates to continue the future land uses identified in downtown to campus plan, but it didn't necessarily stipulate that we would put residential all the way to Lincoln Avenue. So that's why I'm raising this concern now rather than before. I absolutely 100% agree with the designation of Busey as low-density residential. I'm completely behind that concept.
Is it okay to do this? We need to extend time.
Can I move to extend time to 11:30?
A second.
Motion by Mr. Hayes, second by Ms. Wyman to extend time to 11:30. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Sherman.
Thanks. So what I think is on the table now for us to figure out is how to, one, get rid of the language that refers to the downtown campus plan and instead just make it what we want in this plan, and two, to stipulate Busey Avenue as the low-density residential and to come up with a stipulation for Lincoln Avenue that best describes what exists now. And I don't know what that is, and I would prefer to hear from, spend some time thinking about what that should be. Because that's what I thought you were bringing to this evening, and that's not what's on the table.
I'm sorry. I thought when I said remove the study area and maintain what we have now, I thought that was very clear. But I move to postpone consideration of this motion until the next consideration of the comprehensive plan.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Pat, second by Ms. Wyman. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Are there any other amendments that anyone would like to make tonight? Ms. Chenoweth, you still had one. Did you want to do that tonight?
Yes, I would, please. If you look at the first page of the document that I distributed this evening, that says Urbana High School campus expansion, and if you refer to page 84, 84 in the comprehensive plan, map number 11, currently, this shows that the school district expansion, it shows a stipulation of institutional where there are now 18 mostly single-family homes along Washington, Race, and Iowa. The only piece remaining is Sunshine Grocery, what is now Sunshine Grocery, or a neighborhood business designation. My motion is the following, which is that we extend the residential designation along Washington. It's not actually that we preserve the residential designation along Washington and Iowa Street east of Race, and Race Street between Iowa and Washington. That's the first part of my motion. The second part of my motion is to remove the language Urbana School District long-range plans for acquisition and expansion, and replace this with area for future consideration of future school district, Urbana School District master planning process.
Second. Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, second by Ms. Wyman. Is there discussion? Ms. Chenoweth?
I'd like to speak to this motion, which is that the school district has powers, being government, that private entities don't. So, for example, if I own a building in this location and I want to put up, and I want to make a parking lot that say I can rent out to people, or I want to build a multifamily structure, or I want to build some kind of institution, I don't have the right to do that. It's my understanding that the school district does have a right to tear down houses and make parking lots. And there isn't a public process to do that. They just have to acquire the properties, which, like they did, like they've been doing on Iowa Street, and that they can demolish a house like they did 2 weeks ago on Iowa Street, and maybe about a year ago on Washington Street, and they can demolish that house and extend the parking lot. The school district, I've been trying for a long time, actually, to get my hands on the map that we got tonight. It shouldn't have been as hard as it was to get that map. The school district does not have a master plan for the campus, but it's been acting as though it does. A master plan for the campus means something that has gone through a public process, that people have had conversations about, that there's been input gathered from various constituencies, and that has been voted on by the school board. It's my understanding at this point that school district board members have never voted on a master campus plan, at least the one that we have before us this evening. So currently, in our comprehensive plan, the language referring to in capitalized long-range plans by the Urbana School District is really speculative in nature. I think that institutional designations at this corner may be made in future updates of the comprehensive plan process after the school district has put forth a master plan that has gone through a public process and has been negotiated with the city. Certainly, the school district, in good faith, has had Mr. Kowalski sit on committees to discuss potential expansion in this area, but sitting on a committee and meeting a few times to have a conversation and draft a plan is not the same thing as a public process where a board votes. My second concern has to do with preservation of the residential character of this neighborhood. I think that the demolition of 18 homes, many of which are in very good repair at this location, and look as though they'll be in good repair at least for the next 20 to 30 years, would significantly affect how this neighborhood feels. So I also think that because the plan by the school district, which has been put forward but hasn't been voted on, designates this corner as parking lot and parklet, and with some follow-up, my understanding is that the parklet would be a place for students to congregate that's not Carl Park, because there have been problems with Carl Park. I don't consider this kind of age segregation of parks to be desirable, and I'd like there to be further conversation about it. I'd also like the city of Urbana to have the opportunity to put forth alternatives using perhaps city right-of-way or city parking lots to deal with the parking problem at the high school. And so in the spirit of that, I'd like to see us take the more conservative approach in our comprehensive plan by designating the homes that are there currently as residential, which is what they are until a master plan has been put forward, at which point we can consider revisions to the comprehensive plan.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Alex.
I'd also like to speak to the motion. I support it, not with any great opinion as to whether what the school district is proposing to do is appropriate or not, but for the integrity of the comprehensive plan, I think the comprehensive plan needs to reflect present reality and near-term probabilities. And I think in the absence of the school board having formally indicated its intent, ability, and near-term desire to change the use of this land, I think it's appropriate for planning purposes that remain residential.
Is there further discussion? Mr. Roberts?
I would just agree with that. It seems like designating it the way it has been designated here in the blue as belonging already to the school system, the school district, it's kind of capitulating ahead of the, before the fact, and I agree with the amendment that Danielle has made.
Further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Is there further discussion on the main motion, which is the ordinance adopting the comprehensive plan? Is it the pleasure of the group to send this to City Council or to send it to another committee? Ms. Wyman?
My pleasure would be to send this to council with the intent of further discussion and possibly a final vote if council members are ready, but the idea that if council members are not ready, to then postpone the final vote to the following City Council meeting after that.
Is that acceptable to everyone? Mr. Alex?
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay, so, and that actually is, that was the original motion on the floor, was to send this to council, so all in favor of sending this as amended to City Council, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. All right, we are now moving on. We just have 4 items, but I think they'll go quickly. Item 6 on the agenda, ordinance number 2005-03047, an ordinance approving the addition of territory to the Urbana Enterprise Zone, an area along South Philo Road.
Just to refresh your memories, the Urbana Enterprise Zone is an area in Urbana established through the state of Illinois to provide incentives for businesses that are making new construction or redeveloping their site, rehabilitating their facility in some way. These incentives range from sales tax exemptions on building materials to possible property tax abatements for commercial sites for 5 years on the improvements only, also 10 years for industrial projects. There are also a variety of other incentives available, and you can find these in more detail on our website. I also have hard copies with me here tonight. Our current zone includes the downtown area, also North Cunningham properties, some properties along North Lincoln, as well as along University Avenue. Our southernmost boundary right now of the Enterprise Zone is Washington Street, and in the past, our zone has been amended multiple times to add properties that are currently not in, but that plan for development, and we apply through city and state to get that approval. Our proposal currently is to add about 50 parcels along South Philo Road, so we would branch down from Washington down to South Philo Road. As you already know and realize, there are multiple properties along that area that are either vacant or underutilized or are planning redevelopment in the near future. So the Enterprise Zone program, to be extended down to that area, would provide multiple incentives for these businesses and developers and property owners. In addition to helping out the developers for that area, the Enterprise Zone would also comply with our revitalization action plan that was recently passed, and also the proposed comprehensive plan. Public hearing was held last Tuesday. That's part of our process for the state to have that. We did. Records are in your packet of that, and although there was no public comment on record, we did have attendees that provided positive support for the project, and we would like to recommend that you pass this on for approval, and we can then submit the application to the state.
Ms. Wyman.
I move we send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Wyman, second by Mr. Hayes. Discussion, Ms. Chenoweth.
Quick question. Why is the property northeast of Philo and Windsor not included in the Enterprise Zone? And why is the property southeast of Windsor and Philo Road included, given that I believe there's active construction on that property currently?
Well, we do, properties that we have for sure included, we are certain that development will occur, and we can always add additional properties in the future if that's requested. So we just put what we're for sure will experience development in the near future.
I thought that an Enterprise Zone was to stimulate development in areas where we want development, but perhaps are not sure we're going to see it. For example, I think that property to the northeast of Philo and Windsor has been sat on for a while, and an Enterprise Zone might stimulate activity at that corner.
Well, part of the application process to the state is to project what we already know will happen. So if someone does come forward and say, hey, we do have plans, we can immediately apply for that property to be added also.
I think part of it is that they're already under a development agreement with Meyer, and so to add that enterprise zone would be giving them additional benefits when they've already agreed to certain benefits that have been passed and signed by the developer.
Oh, I didn't understand it was under a development agreement.
Yeah, that's the Meyer tract.
And the tract to the southeast is not under a development agreement?
Well, there are some parts that are. We've done some of that with drainage and so forth, but I don't think it's under, as far as incentives to build. There are no incentives to build.
Right. There are no incentives for the southeast tract, but there are incentives for the Meyer tract. We left the Meyer tract out because there were incentives in place. If we decide later, if for some reason that's dissolved or something else comes along, we can petition for this parcel to be added in. It's probably more prudent to leave it out until we know. Otherwise, we'll be providing double incentives.
Yeah, I thought, I had it in my mind switched that we actually, since I've been on council, had a development agreement with the southeast tract and did not have a development agreement here. And so you're saying it's actually
the other way
opposite?
around. As far as the incentive money goes, it's the other way around.
Okay.
Further discussion on the motion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have ordinance number 2005-03049, an ordinance approving and authorizing the execution of a redevelopment agreement, the second amended and restated for 5 Points Northeast. Mr. Walden.
As you know, we've been trying to induce redevelopment of 5 Points Northeast for a number of years. The proposal that you have is consistent with our TIF plan as well as our downtown plan. The best way to understand the mechanics of what is happening here is to turn about 3 pages in, and you'll see a minor plat subdivision. Okay? As you know, we've had a couple of redevelopment agreements already in order to induce this redevelopment. One of the things that occurred on lots 102 and 101 is that we recorded mortgages for the demolition and remediation costs of the previous 2 agreements. What this agreement is doing is releasing the mortgage and note on lot 101 and lot 102 and recording another mortgage and note on lot 103. The lot 101 and lot 102 are being released so they can be sold for redevelopment, which is Walgreens, by the developer. It can't be sold and can't be closed upon until we release the note and mortgage. So we're going to release that note and mortgage, and then we're going to re-record another note and mortgage on lot 103. Also, there is a piece of right-of-way that we acted as a conduit on with the county, which is at the very bottom of this diagram, and that will be transferred and paid for at our cost by the developer, and that's a conduit transaction. So what we're doing is we're releasing 101 and 102 in the amount of $200,000 and re-recording in the amount of $100,000 lot 103. That's essentially what we're doing. I can go into all the details you want to go into.
Ms. Wyman.
I move we send ordinance number 2005-03-049 to council with a recommendation for approval.
Motion by Ms. Wyman, second by Mr. Hayes. Discussion?
Just one other point.
Sure, Bruce.
In terms of cost benefit, the cost of the one-time TIF costs that we have in this project are recoverable in 1 year.
Great.
So it's a big project.
Yes. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have ordinance number 2005-03048. This is an ordinance amending the liquor code for the number of T2 licenses with city as co-sponsor.
Essentially, what we're doing is we're just adding additional events where the city is a co-sponsor. We were limited with the UBA to 2, and we're expanding that as long as the city is a co-sponsor. And this would enable them to do additional events downtown and in response to the letter by the UBA. And it's been through legal, and Mayor and I have looked at it, and looks okay.
Is there a motion to send this to city council with
I move.
recommendation approval?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Roberts, second by Ms. Wyman. Discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. And our last item, ordinance number 2005-03051, an ordinance authorizing the chief administrative officer to execute an intergovernmental agreement, JAG program.
This is an agreement between the City of Urbana, the City of Champaign, and the county to purchase fingerprinting equipment and technology. It is a joint purchase. It requires an intergovernmental agreement. There is this will be in the form of a grant, Justice Department grant, and there is no matching grant on our behalf. Champaign is the lead agency. If you want to get into what the technology is on this, I'll have to defer to others, but this is in order to make the grant application, we must execute this three-way intergovernmental agreement.
Ms. Wyman?
I move to send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
I second that motion.
Motion by Ms. Wyman, second by Mr. Roberts. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Alex.
Who is the user of this technology?
The user is all three agencies, including Juvie. Yeah.
Three agencies meaning the respective police departments?
Yes.
Okay, that wasn't clear. Thank you.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. And with no